The morning came cold and dark, the way mornings always came to Iron Ridge Ranch in April of 1875. Ethan Caldwell stood on the porch at 4:30, his hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm while he stared at land his father had died trying to protect. 640 acres stretched before him in the pre-dawn gloom, and every inch of it felt like a stone tied around his neck. The creek that fed the property ran thin, too thin. Even in darkness, Ethan could hear the difference. Where there should have been the steady rush of snowmelt cascading down from the high country, there came only a trickle, weak and uncertain. He had checked the flow yesterday at noon, 15 cubic feet per second. Normal spring flow should have been 50. He set the cup on the porch rail and descended the steps. His boots hit packed earth that cracked under his weight. The ground was thirsty. The cattle would be thirstier still. 20 years. That was how long his father had poured sweat and hope into this dirt. Started with nothing but a government claim and the clothes on his back. Built the main house log by log. Cleared the stones from the south pasture until his hands bled. Strung fence wire through winters that froze a man's breath in his lungs. And now it could all disappear because of a piece of paper. Ethan walked to the barn, his stride purposeful, despite the weight of sleeplessness. He had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in the past month. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face. That last afternoon when the fever had him and the words came hard. "Finish the land patent, son. Don't let Harker take this place." The patent. The final step that would make Iron Ridge truly theirs under the law. 5 years of residence check. Improvements to the land check. Survey completed check. But the final filing fee of $125 remained unpaid, and without it the government could still claim the land had not been properly homesteaded. Worse, Frank Harker could challenge the boundaries, could claim sections that rightfully belonged to the Caldwells, could produce documents, real or forged, that might persuade a judge to see things his way. Ethan had 60 days. 60 days to gather $465. 125 for the patent, 340 to clear the debt at the bank, the debt his father had taken out 2 years ago when drought had withered the summer grass and they'd had to buy feed just to keep the herd alive. Inside the barn, the horses stirred at his approach. Ethan lit a lantern and hung it on the center post. The familiar smells of hay and leather and animal warmth surrounded him. This at least remained solid, real. A man could trust a horse. Could trust good leather and iron horseshoes and the reliable rhythm of morning chores. He had just finished checking the water troughs when he heard small footsteps behind him. "Mr. Caldwell." Ethan turned to find Tommy Brennan standing in the barn doorway, his thin frame backlit by the first gray hints of dawn. The boy was 12, all knobby elbows and oversized ears, but he showed up every morning without fail. Had been showing up since his father died of fever 6 months back. "You're early," Ethan said. "Wanted to get the fences done before the heat sets in." Tommy stepped closer, his eyes eager despite the hour. "Pa always said morning work counts double." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. The boy's father, Michael Brennan, had been a good man, a neighbor who would ride 5 miles in a storm to help pull a breeched calf. The kind of man this country needed more of, and now he was 6 feet under in the Silverton Cemetery, leaving a widow and 3 children to scratch by on a failed mining claim. "Your pa was right about that," Ethan said. He moved to the workbench where tools hung in neat rows, selected 2 hammers, a bag of nails, a coil of wire. "We'll start on the north section. Some posts came loose in that last wind." Tommy took the tools Ethan handed him, his thin arms straining slightly under the weight. But he did not complain, never complained. They walked together across the dark pasture, the grass crunching underfoot. The sky was beginning to pale at the eastern edge, that particular shade of gray that came just before true dawn. Ethan moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew every rock and gopher hole on his property. Tommy followed, watching where the older man placed his feet, learning the land the same way Ethan had learned it from his father. When they reached the damaged section of fence, Ethan set down his tools and knelt beside the first loose post. Cedar 3 feet long sunk 2.5 feet into the ground. The wind had worked it back and forth until the hole had widened and the post tilted at an angle. "Why does it have to be so deep?" Tommy asked, kneeling beside him. Ethan glanced at the boy. This was good. Questions meant the mind was working. "Frost line runs about 2.5 feet down in this soil. You sink a post shallower than that, winter freeze will push it right back up. Come spring, your whole fence line is ruined." Tommy nodded slowly, absorbing this. "How deep is deep enough for different ground?" "Depends on where you are. Clay soil you might get away with less. Sandy ground you need more. The key is knowing your land, really knowing it." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Ethan demonstrating how to pack the dirt tight around the post, how to test the stability with a firm shake. Tommy watched every movement, his young face serious with concentration. As the sun finally broke the horizon, spilling gold across the valley, Ethan straightened and looked at the boy. Really looked at him. Tommy had his father's strong jaw, his mother's dark eyes. At 12, he was already showing the kind of character some men never found. Responsible, eager to learn, willing to work without complaint. Ethan thought of Blake. His brother had been like this once at 12, excited about the ranch, eager to ride with Ethan to learn the work, to be part of something bigger than himself. But somewhere between 12 and 24, that eagerness had curdled into resentment. Blake looked at Iron Ridge now and saw only obligation, saw chains instead of legacy. "You're thinking about something heavy, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan blinked, pulled from his thoughts. "Just wool gathering." "My ma says that's what folks do when they're worried but don't want to say so." A smile tugged at Ethan's mouth despite himself. "Your ma's a wise woman." They finished the fence line as the sun climbed higher. By the time they walked back toward the main house, the day had grown warm and the shadows had shortened. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Mrs. Hawthorne would have breakfast ready soon. But when they reached the yard, Ethan's jaw tightened. The hands were gathering by the barn. 6 of them, weathered men in work clothes, waiting for the morning briefing, waiting for instructions, waiting for Blake, who was nowhere to be seen. Peterson, the oldest of the crew, stepped forward. His face was creased like old leather, his hair white as snow under his battered hat. He had worked for Ethan's father 20 years ago and had stayed on when the old man died. If there was a more loyal soul in Colorado, Ethan had never met them. "Boss," Peterson said, his voice gravelly from decades of trail dust. "The young Mr. Caldwell rode out last night. Said something about that wild stallion up in the high country." Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. He forced them to relax, forced his face to remain neutral. The men watched him, reading his reaction the way they would read the weather. "When did he leave?" "Around sundown. Took his saddle, his bedroll, provisions for 2 days. 2 days. They had cattle to move, fences to mend, water troughs to clean. They had 60 days to save this ranch, and Blake had decided to chase a ghost horse through the mountains." Ethan looked at the assembled men. Good men, all of them. Men who depended on this ranch for their wages, their food, their shelter. Men who had families in town, or sweethearts waiting, or debts of their own to pay. They deserved better than this. Deserved a united front, not a house divided against itself. "All right," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Peterson, take Johnson and Riley. Move the cattle from the south pasture up to the near ridge. Grass is better there and they'll be closer to the creek. Matthews, I need you to check every water trough on the property. We're running low, so we can't afford to waste a drop through leaks. Stevens and Garrett, finish the fence work Tommy and I started, then move on to the east section." The men nodded, accepting their orders without question. They dispersed to their tasks, leaving Ethan standing alone in the yard with Tommy. "He'll come back," Tommy said quietly. Ethan glanced down at the boy. "What makes you say that?" "Because this is his home, and even when you're mad at home, you always come back to it eventually. Out of the mouths of children." Ethan placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder, gave it a brief squeeze. "Go on inside. Get some breakfast. Then you can help Matthews with those troughs." The boy nodded and headed for the house. Ethan remained where he was, looking toward the mountains. Somewhere up there, Blake was riding through pine forests and rocky draws, chasing a horse that had evaded capture for 3 years. A black stallion with a white star on its forehead. Beautiful, wild, and utterly useless to a working ranch. The ache in Ethan's chest had nothing to do with the horse and everything to do with the boy chasing it. Had he failed Blake somehow? Had he been too hard on him after their parents died? Too demanding, too quick to burden a 14-year-old boy with the weight of adult responsibility? But what choice had there been? Someone had to keep the ranch running. Someone had to make sure Blake had food and clothes and a roof. Someone had to be the adult, and at 23, Ethan had been the only option. "Breakfast is ready," Mrs. Hawthorne called from the porch. "And you look like death warmed over Ethan Caldwell. Get in here and eat something." Ethan obeyed. Mrs. Hawthorne was not a woman you argued with. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in its customary tight bun. She had been with the family since before Ethan could walk. Had delivered him, in fact, when his mother's labor came sudden and fierce during a blizzard that kept the doctor trapped in town. She knew him better than anyone living, which made her both comforting and dangerous. Inside the kitchen smelled of coffee and bacon and fresh biscuits. Tommy sat at the long table already working his way through a plate piled high. The other hands filed in, taking their places with the easy familiarity of men who had shared this table 100 times before. Ethan took his seat at the head, his father's seat. Some days he still expected to look up and see the old man there, reading the Denver newspaper by lamplight, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Mrs. Hawthorne set a plate in front of Ethan, eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, 2 biscuits still steaming from the oven. His stomach growled despite his worries. "Eat," she commanded, as if he were still 10 years old. "A man can't think on an empty belly." Ethan ate. Around him the men talked in low voices. Cattle prices were down again. There was talk of the railroad maybe extending a spur line to Silverton, which would make shipping easier. Stevens had heard that the Carlson ranch to the west was up for sale after old Carlson broke his hip and decided to move in with his daughter in Denver. Ordinary concerns. The kind of talk that filled working mornings on ranches across the west. But underneath it all, Ethan heard the unspoken question. What would happen to Iron Ridge if they could not pay the debt? What would happen to their jobs, their security? He finished eating and stood. "Peterson, a word." They stepped outside into the growing heat of the day. Peterson pulled a plug of tobacco from his vest pocket and bit off a piece, working it into his cheek before speaking. "Blake worries you," he said. It was not a question. Blake is 24 years old enough to make his own choices. But still young enough to make foolish ones. Peterson spat into the dirt. "The boy's got wildness in him, always has, just like your pa did before he settled." Ethan's head snapped up. "My father was never wild." "Shows what you know." Peterson's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement. "Your pa rode with some rough company before he came here. Worked cattle drives up from Texas. Got himself shot once over a card game in Dodge City. Your ma civilized him, turned him into the man you remember. But the wildness was there first." This information settled uneasily in Ethan's chest. He had never thought of his father as anything other than the steady, reliable man who had built this ranch from nothing. "Blake needs what your pa had," Peterson continued. "He needs something worth settling for. Right now all he sees is duty and work. He doesn't see the why of it." "The why is obvious. This ranch is our future, our legacy." "Your legacy, boss. Maybe not his." The words stung because they carried truth. Ethan had always assumed Blake would eventually take over when Ethan grew too old for the hard work. But maybe that assumption had been a mistake. "I need to go to town," Ethan said, changing the subject. "Get supplies checked with the bank about the payment schedule. You're in charge while I'm gone. What if Blake comes back? Tell him we'll talk when I return." Peterson nodded slowly. "One more thing, boss. Harker's lawyer was in town yesterday, asking questions about the land patent." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About the boundaries. About whether the survey was properly filed. About your father's debts." Peterson spat again. "Harker's circling like a buzzard. Be careful." "I'm always careful." "No." Peterson said, his old eyes serious. "You're always responsible. There's a difference." Ethan saddled his horse, a reliable gelding named Copper, and rode toward Silverton with Peterson's words echoing in his mind. The town lay 15 miles east, nestled in a valley where 3 creeks converged. It had started as a mining camp and had grown into something more permanent, with a main street, a bank, a general store, a church, and even a small newspaper printed once a week. The ride gave Ethan time to think. Too much time. He found himself cataloging everything that could go wrong. The harvest might fail. The cattle might sicken. The bank might sell his debt to Harker. The judge might rule against him on the land patent. Blake might never come home. "Stop it." His father's voice clear, as if the man rode beside him. "Worry is just prayer for things you don't want." Ethan forced his mind to settle, focused instead on the land around him, the way the morning light caught the new grass, the distant peaks still capped with snow, the hawk circling overhead riding thermals only it could feel. This was why the ranch mattered. Not just the money or the legacy, but this, the connection to something bigger and older than any one man's brief time on earth. By the time he reached Silverton, the sun stood high and the main street bustled with activity. Miners coming off night shifts, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, women with baskets over their arms heading to the mercantile, children chasing a dog between the buildings, their laughter bright in the clear air. Ethan tied Copper to the rail outside the general store and went inside. The interior smelled of coffee beans and leather and the sawdust scattered on the floor. Mr. Daniels, the proprietor, looked up from behind the counter and nodded. "Ethan, good to see you." "Mr. Daniels, I need supplies." They went through the list. 200 pounds of grain, 50 pounds of flour, 20 of sugar, coffee, salt, kerosene for the lamps, a new coil of barbed wire, nails. Ethan kept a running tally in his head. $47. He would pay on credit, as he always did, with a promise to settle after the fall harvest. As Daniels began gathering the items, the door opened behind Ethan. He turned, expecting one of the townsfolk. Instead, thunder rolled in the distance and rain began to patter against the windows. The pleasant morning had darkened in the way of mountain weather, sudden and absolute. "Storm's moving in fast," Daniels observed, moving to the window. "Going to be a gully washer." Ethan joined him. Outside, the street was already emptying as people scurried for shelter. The rain intensified, turning the packed earth to mud within minutes. And there, huddled under the overhang of Daniel's porch, stood a young woman. She wore a dark traveling dress that had seen better days. Her shawl, clutched tight around her shoulders, was soaked through. But what caught Ethan's attention was not her clothes or her obvious discomfort. It was her face. Even from inside, even through the rain-streaked glass, he could see the set of her jaw, the straightness of her back despite the storm, the way she stood as if daring the weather to break her. "Poor thing," Daniels muttered. "That's the girl who came in yesterday asking about work. Said her name was Morgan, Claire Morgan." Ethan watched as the young woman shifted her weight, and that was when he noticed it. The unevenness of her stance, the way her left leg bent at an angle that was not quite natural. "She's been out there a while," Daniels continued. "Told her she could come inside, but she said she had no money for purchases and didn't want to impose." Something in Ethan's chest shifted. Pride. He recognized it because he wore the same armor himself. The determination not to be pitied, not to be seen as less than. "We lost our cook last month," Ethan heard himself say. "Woman decided to marry some miner and move to Wyoming." "You thinking of hiring her?" "I'm thinking ranch work is hard." "She looks like she knows hard." Ethan moved toward the door before he could talk himself out of it, stepped out into the rain, which immediately soaked through his shirt. The young woman looked up, startled, as he approached. Up close, she was younger than he had thought, maybe 22 or 23. Her hair, dark and pulled back, framed a face that was more interesting than beautiful. Strong cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it did not smile easily. and eyes green as new leaves that met his without flinching. "Miss Morgan," he said. "Yes." "I'm Ethan Caldwell. I own Iron Ridge Ranch about 15 miles west of here." She waited, saying nothing, not making this easy for him. "I heard you're looking for work. We need a cook." "I can cook." Her voice was steady despite the rain running down her face. "I can also clean, mend clothes, tend a garden. I read and write well enough to keep accounts if needed." "Ranch work is hard," Ethan said. "Days start before dawn. You'd be cooking for me, my brother, and 10 hands, sometimes more during busy seasons. I've worked hard before, Mr. Caldwell." She lifted her chin slightly. "In St. Louis, I worked 14-hour days in a garment factory and then came home to care for my cousin's children. I'm not afraid of hard work." The rain pounded down between them. Thunder cracked overhead close enough to feel in the chest. And still she stood there waiting for his decision, refusing to beg. $20 a month, Ethan said, plus room and board. You'll have your own room off the kitchen. We'll try it for a month, see how it works for both of us. Something flickered in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or hope quickly masked. "That's fair. Do you have belongings?" "A carpet bag, inside the store." "I'll have Mr. Daniels load it with the supplies. We should leave soon. This storm's going to get worse before it gets better." She nodded once, crisp and businesslike. But as she moved past him toward the store entrance, Ethan noticed her limp for the first time clearly. Her left foot turned inward slightly. Her gait, though determined, was uneven. She had to work harder than most people just to walk. And yet she had walked all the way from wherever she had been staying to this store in the rain, looking for work, refusing to give up. Inside, while Daniels gathered her bag, Ethan observed Claire Morgan more carefully. She stood by the counter, water pooling at her feet, her hands folded in front of her with a composure that spoke of practice. This was a woman who had learned to make herself small, to not draw attention, to bear scrutiny without showing how much it cost her. When Daniels brought out a small worn carpet bag, Claire took it with a quiet thank you. Ethan noticed her hands. They bore calluses, the hands of someone who had indeed worked hard for a long time. "The supplies are ready," Daniels said. "I'll load them in your wagon, Ethan." "No wagon today? Riding. We'll have to make do." Ethan turned to Claire. "Can you ride?" The briefest hesitation. "Not well, and not easily, because of my leg." He appreciated her directness. No shame, no elaborate explanation, just fact. "You'll ride with me then. I've got a steady horse. He won't give you trouble." "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be. I'm heading that way anyway." He softened his tone slightly. "Miss Morgan, if you're going to work for me, you might as well get used to accepting help when it's practical. The ranch is a long walk." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Very well, Mr. Caldwell." They waited while Daniels bundled the supplies in oilcloth and secured them. The rain showed no sign of letting up. If anything, it intensified, drumming on the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Finally, everything was ready. Ethan settled his hat firmly on his head and looked at Claire. "Stay close. We'll move fast." Outside, he untied Copper and swung into the saddle. Then he reached down. Claire looked at his extended hand for a moment as if weighing whether to accept it. Then she took it. Her grip was firm. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, settling her on the horse's rump. "Hold on," he said over his shoulder. Her arms came around his waist, tentative at first, then tighter as the horse started forward. Ethan clicked his tongue, and Copper broke into a trot, then a canter as they left the town behind. The rain lashed at them from all sides. Within minutes they were both soaked through, but Copper was sure-footed even in the mud, and Ethan knew these trails by heart. He could ride them blind if he had to. Behind him, Claire held on without complaint. He could feel the tension in her body, the way she gripped tighter when they took a turn or splashed through a swollen creek. But she did not cry out, did not ask him to slow down, just endured. After a while, when the rain eased slightly, he spoke. "You came a long way for work." "Yes." "From St. Louis." "Originally. More recently from a mining camp west of here. My cousin's husband had a claim. It didn't pan out. They moved back east. I stayed. Why? A pause. Then, because I was tired of being someone's burden, tired of depending on charity from people who resented giving it. I wanted to make my own way. Ethan understood that, understood it bone deep. Family can be complicated. Yes. Something in her voice suggested layers of meaning he could only guess at. They rode in silence for a while. The storm began to clear as they climbed into the foothills. By the time they reached the ridge that overlooked Iron Ridge Ranch, the sun had broken through the clouds, turning the wet world into a field of diamonds. Ethan reined in Copper at the top of the ridge. Below them, the ranch spread out in the valley. The main house solid and square, the barn, the corrals, the outbuildings, the creek still thin but glinting in the new light. The cattle, small as ants from this distance, scattered across the green pasture. "That's Iron Ridge," he said. Claire was silent for a long moment, then so quietly he almost missed it. "It's beautiful." "It's home," Ethan said. And then, because something in her tone made him want to explain, "My father homesteaded here 20 years ago, came with nothing but a wagon, a wife, and a dream, built everything you see from scratch." He must have been a remarkable man. He was. The words came harder than Ethan expected. "He died 3 months ago. Fever took him." "I'm sorry." They sat there a moment longer, looking down at the ranch. Then Ethan urged Copper forward down the slope toward home. As they approached the house, Mrs. Hawthorne emerged onto the porch. Her sharp eyes took in the scene immediately. Ethan could practically see her mind working, cataloging the new arrival, the circumstances, the implications. He dismounted first, then helped Claire down. She swayed slightly when her feet hit the ground, her bad leg clearly stiff from the ride. But she steadied herself quickly with that same determined pride he was beginning to recognize as her defining characteristic. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Ethan said. "This is Miss Claire Morgan. She's going to be our new cook. Miss Morgan, this is Mrs. Hawthorne. She's been with our family for over 20 years. The ranch would fall apart without her." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked Claire over, taking in the soaked dress, the worn shoes, the limp that Claire could not fully hide despite her best efforts. Ethan tensed, ready to intervene if the older woman showed any sign of the pity or dismissal that Claire had likely faced her entire life. But Mrs. Hawthorne simply nodded once, brisk and businesslike. "Can you make a decent stew, girl?" "Yes, ma'am, and bread and pies and most anything else you might need." "We'll see about that." But there was the faintest hint of approval in Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes. "Come along, then. Let's get you out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Claire followed the older woman inside. Ethan began unloading the supplies, stacking them on the porch to be carried in later. He was halfway through when he sensed someone watching. He looked up to find Tommy standing at the corner of the house. "Who's the lady?" the boy asked. "New cook. Her name is Miss Morgan." "She limps." "Yes." "Does it hurt her?" "Probably, but that's not our business." Ethan set down a bag of grain and looked at Tommy seriously. "What matters is whether she can do the work, and whether we treat her with respect." "Understood." "Yes, sir." Tommy hesitated, then added, "She looked cold." "She was. That's why Mrs. Hawthorne is getting her settled. Now, did you finish helping Matthews with the water troughs?" "Yes, sir. All done." "Good man. Go get yourself some supper then. It'll be ready soon." Tommy ran off toward the bunkhouse. Ethan finished unloading, his mind turning over the day's events. He had left the ranch this morning with a list of practical concerns: supplies, the debt, the land patent, Blake's absence. And he was returning with all those problems still unsolved, plus a new variable in the form of Claire Morgan. But something about her presence felt right in a way he could not quite name. Maybe it was her pride, or her refusal to be seen as less than, or maybe it was simply the fact that she had showed up in the rain looking for honest work and had not flinched when he offered it. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Ethan hung his wet hat on the peg by the door and moved toward the kitchen. He could hear Mrs. Hawthorne's voice explaining the layout, the schedules, the expectations. He paused in the doorway. Claire had changed into dry clothes, a simple gray dress that Mrs. Hawthorne must have lent her. Her dark hair hung loose down her back, still damp but no longer dripping. She stood at the big cast-iron stove, listening intently as Mrs. Hawthorne demonstrated how to regulate the dampers. "This one controls the oven temperature," Mrs. Hawthorne was saying. "Open it too far, you'll burn everything. Not far enough, nothing will bake proper. You have to learn to feel it." Claire nodded her hands, moving over the stove as if memorizing its geography by touch. She looked up and saw Ethan in the doorway. For a moment their eyes met. In hers he saw determination, and underneath that vulnerability carefully guarded. "Your room is through here," Mrs. Hawthorne said, moving toward a door off the kitchen. Claire followed, and Ethan returned to the porch. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The hands were coming in from their work, washing up at the pump, talking in low voices about the day. Soon they would want supper. And tomorrow would bring another dawn, another day of trying to hold everything together. Ethan sat on the porch steps and let himself feel just for a moment the weight of it all. The ranch, Blake, the debt, the patent. His father's legacy pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. "You're stronger than you know, son." His father's voice again from some memory Ethan could not quite place. When the weight gets too heavy, that's when you find out what you're made of. Ethan hoped that was true, because the weight was getting heavier every day. The sound of hoofbeats snapped him from his thoughts. He looked up to see a rider approaching from the north. As the figure drew closer, Ethan recognized the horse first, Blake's sorrel mare, and there slumped in the saddle was Blake himself. Ethan rose slowly, his stomach tightening. Blake's shirt was torn. His face was pale even from this distance, and he rode with the careful stiffness of a man trying not to show pain. "Boss!" Peterson appeared from the barn, his face tight with concern. "That's Blake." "I see him." They waited as Blake rode into the yard. Up close it was clear something had gone badly wrong. Blake's hands gripped the reins with white-knuckled intensity. His left eye was swollen, the skin around it turning purple. Blood crusted his upper lip. "What happened?" Ethan asked, his voice level despite the alarm coursing through him. "Horse threw me." Blake's voice was rough. "Stallion spooked at something. I went off wrong. Hit a tree." He tried to dismount and nearly fell. Ethan caught him feeling his brother's weight sag against him. Up close, Blake smelled of sweat and blood and fear. "Get the doctor," Ethan snapped at Peterson. "No doctor," Blake said. "Just bruised. I'll be fine." "The hell you will. You can barely stand." "I said no doctor." Blake pulled away, or tried to, made it 2 steps before his legs gave out. This time, when Ethan caught him, Blake did not protest. They half carried, half dragged him into the house and up the stairs to his room. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared with cloths and water, her face grim. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide. "Get out," Blake muttered when he saw her. "Don't need audience." "That's Miss Morgan," Ethan said sharply. "She works here now, and you'll speak respectfully or not at all." Blake's head lolled back against the pillow, his eyes closed. "Sorry. Didn't mean. Just rest." Ethan began unbuttoning Blake's shirt to assess the damage. Bruises, dark and ugly, covered his ribs. His left wrist was swollen, but nothing seemed broken, nothing that would not heal given time. Mrs. Hawthorne worked efficiently, cleaning the cuts, applying salve to the worst bruises. Blake bore it silently, his jaw clenched. When she finished, she looked at Ethan. "He needs rest, and someone should check on him through the night. Make sure there's no concussion." "I'll do it," Ethan said. "You need sleep yourself." "I'll manage." Mrs. Hawthorne left, closing the door softly behind her. Ethan sat in the chair beside Blake's bed, studying his brother's battered face. In sleep, Blake looked young, too young to be so angry at the world. "Why do you do this?" Ethan asked quietly, not expecting an answer. "Why do you keep pushing, keep testing, keep running toward things that could kill you?" Blake's eyes cracked open. "Because it's the only time I feel alive. Only time I'm not just going through the motions of your plan for my life." The words hit harder than any fist. Ethan had no response. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Blake's breathing evened out into true sleep. Ethan remained in the chair keeping watch as the house settled around them. Downstairs he could hear the quiet sounds of evening, the hands finishing supper, Mrs. Hawthorne's measured footsteps, and something new, unfamiliar, Claire's lighter tread, the uneven rhythm of her walk. 60 days. The thought circled back insistent. 60 days to save the ranch, to pay the debts, to complete the patent, and now to somehow mend what was broken between him and Blake before it shattered completely. The lamplight flickered. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows, and Ethan Caldwell sat vigil, carrying the weight of land and legacy and love that felt in that moment almost too heavy to bear. The first light came gray and cold through Claire Morgan's window, pulling her from uneasy sleep. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before memory returned. The ranch, her room off the kitchen, the new life she had chosen, or perhaps the only life available to her now. She rose carefully, testing her left leg. The long ride yesterday had stiffened it worse than usual. Pain lanced from ankle to hip as she put weight on it. She gritted her teeth and stood anyway. Pain was an old companion. She had learned long ago not to give it more attention than necessary. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed with a quilt Mrs. Hawthorne had provided, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and that window looking out toward mountains that caught the dawn light and turned it to gold. In St. Louis, her window had faced a brick wall 3 feet away. This felt like luxury. She dressed quickly in the gray dress Mrs. Hawthorne had given her, pinned up her hair, and moved to the kitchen. The house was silent around her, but ranchers rose early. She had perhaps 30 minutes before they would expect breakfast. The kitchen was bigger than any she had worked in before. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, shelves lined with supplies, a long table that could seat 15 if needed. She moved through the space-opening cupboards, learning where things lived. Flour here, coffee there, cast-iron skillets hanging from hooks. By the time she heard boots on the porch, she had coffee brewing and was mixing biscuit dough. The door opened. She looked up to see Ethan Caldwell enter, his hat in his hands, his dark hair damp as if he had just washed at the pump. Their eyes met. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan nodded once. "Morning, Miss Morgan." "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. Coffee is ready." "I didn't expect you to start so early. You told me days began before dawn. I took you at your word." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. He moved to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee, and took a long drink. When he lowered the cup, some of the tension in his shoulders had eased. "How is your brother?" Claire asked, keeping her voice neutral. "Sleeping. The bruises look worse this morning, but Mrs. Hawthorne says that is normal. Nothing broken." "That's fortunate." "Yes." The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Claire returned to her biscuits, cutting them with the rim of a glass and laying them on a baking sheet. She could feel Ethan watching her work, assessing, making sure his decision to hire her had not been a mistake. The oven was already hot. She slid the biscuits inside and moved to the pantry for eggs and bacon. As she passed near Ethan, she stumbled slightly. Her leg, still stiff, betrayed her. She caught herself on the table edge, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "The floor is uneven there," Ethan said quietly. "I keep meaning to fix it." A lie offered kindly. Claire appreciated it even as she saw through it. "I'll watch for it." She cooked quickly and efficiently, the way she had learned in factory boarding houses where 50 women needed feeding before the morning shift. Eggs scrambled with butter, bacon fried crisp, the biscuits golden and steaming when she pulled them from the oven. By the time the ranch hands began filing and stomping mud from their boots, she had platters ready and more coffee brewing. Tommy was first through the door, his young face eager. He stopped when he saw Claire, suddenly shy. "Morning, Miss Morgan." "Good morning, Tommy." "Hungry?" "Yes, ma'am. Always hungry, my ma says." "Then sit. Eat." The boy obeyed, piling his plate high. The other hands followed, nodding their greetings to Claire, but mostly keeping their attention on the food. Peterson, the white-haired foreman, was last. He paused beside the stove. "Biscuits smell good, miss." "Thank you. Better than what we've been eating for the past month, that's certain." Blake appeared in the doorway just as everyone settled at the table. His face looked worse than the night before, as Ethan had predicted. The bruise around his eye had deepened to purple and black. He moved stiffly, favoring his left side, but he was upright and walking, which was something. He stopped when he saw Claire at the stove. "So you're real. Thought maybe I dreamed you last night." "I'm real, Mr. Caldwell. Blake, just Blake." He flashed a smile that probably usually charmed women. "Mr. Caldwell makes me sound like my brother." From the head of the table, Ethan's voice came sharp. "Miss Morgan, to you, and sit down before you fall down." Blake's smile faded, but he moved to the table and took his seat, accepting the plate Claire brought him without further comment. The meal passed with the sounds of men eating, forks on plates, coffee cups refilled, low conversations about the day's work ahead. Claire moved between stove and table, keeping platters full, her limp now more pronounced as her leg warmed to the work but still ached. She noticed Ethan watching her, not staring at her leg as most people did, but at her face, her hands, the way she organized her movements to minimize the walking required. He was learning her the way he probably learned horses or cattle, seeing how she worked, what she could do. When the men began to leave, heading out to their morning tasks, Ethan lingered. Blake had gone back upstairs to rest. Tommy had offered to help with dishes, but Claire had shooed him out. Now it was just her and Ethan in the kitchen, with the morning light streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee still heavy in the air. "Everything was good," Ethan said. "Thank you." "That's my job." "Still, I wanted you to know." He hesitated, then added, "There's an old stool in the pantry, 3 legs, more stable than 4. You might find it useful when your leg pains you." The kindness in his voice, awkward and unpracticed, touched something in Claire she had thought long buried. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan left. Claire stood alone in the kitchen, her hands in dishwater, and let herself feel it. The strangeness of being in a new place. The uncertainty of whether she would measure up. The small, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found somewhere she could stay. The morning passed in the rhythm of kitchen work. Claire prepared vegetables for the midday meal, baked bread, swept the floors. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared periodically, offering advice about the stove's temperament or where certain supplies were kept. The older woman was brisk but not unkind, and Claire found herself grateful for the guidance. Around noon, as she was stirring a pot of stew, she heard voices outside. Through the window she saw Ethan and Tommy walking toward the barn. The boy carried a shovel over his shoulder. Ethan's hand rested briefly on Tommy's shoulder, guiding him toward something only they could see. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared beside her. "He's good with that boy." "Tommy, Ethan sees something in him, maybe what he wishes Blake could have been." Claire glanced at the older woman. "You've known them a long time." "Since before Ethan was born. Delivered him myself during a blizzard that kept the doctor trapped in town for 3 days. Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes, when they met Claire's, were sharp. "I know these boys better than they know themselves sometimes." "What happened between them, Ethan and Blake?" "Life happened. Their parents died when Blake was 14. Ethan was 23, too young to be a father, but old enough to know someone had to step up. He did what needed doing, but Blake sees it as control instead of care." "Is he wrong?" Mrs. Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes the line between protecting someone and caging them is thinner than we'd like to think." After lunch, Claire watched through the window as Ethan took Tommy down to the creek. They walked slowly, Ethan pointing at things, explaining. Tommy nodded, his young face serious with concentration. At one point, Ethan knelt beside the water, gesturing for Tommy to do the same. They stayed like that for several minutes, studying something Claire could not see from the house. When they returned, Tommy burst into the kitchen, his eyes bright with excitement. "Miss Morgan, Mr. Caldwell taught me about water flow and calculations. Did you know a cow needs 10 to 15 gallons of water every day? And with 100 head, that's 1,500 gallons. That's why the creek level matters so much. Claire smiled at his enthusiasm. That sounds like important knowledge. It is. Mr. Caldwell says knowing your land means knowing every creek, every spring, every place water collects. Says water is life out here, and a man who doesn't respect water won't last long. Ethan appeared in the doorway behind Tommy, his expression unreadable. But Claire thought she saw something soften in his eyes as he listened to the boy repeat his lessons. "Tommy, go help Peterson with the fence repairs," Ethan said. "Yes, sir." Tommy grabbed a biscuit from the plate on the table and ran out. Ethan remained in the doorway. He talks a lot. He's excited. Learning excites him. His father was the same way, always asking questions, always wanting to understand the why of things, not just the what. "You miss him." Tommy's father. "Michael Brennan was a good man, better than most. When he died, it felt like this valley lost something it won't get back." Claire heard the weight in his voice, the way loss accumulated in a man's chest until it became hard to breathe around it. She knew that weight herself. "But Tommy carries his father's best parts forward," she said. "That's worth something." Ethan looked at her, then really looked at her as if seeing something he had not expected. "Yes, it is." The days that followed fell into a pattern. Claire rose before dawn, started the coffee-prepared breakfast for 12 hungry men. She cooked meals that were simple but substantial: beef stew with dumplings, roasted chicken with potatoes, fresh bread every other day. The men ate without complaint, and sometimes with sounds of appreciation that warmed her more than she wanted to admit. Blake healed slowly. He spent most of his time in his room or on the porch, moving gingerly, his bruises fading from purple to yellow-green. He was polite to Claire, but distant, as if he had not quite decided what to make of her yet. Ethan remained a cipher. He spoke to her only about practical matters: the number of men expected for meals, supplies that needed ordering from town. But Claire noticed things: the way he always entered a room carefully as if afraid his size might intimidate, the way he thanked her after every meal even when rushed, the way his eyes followed her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, though what he was thinking remained a mystery. On the 5th morning, Ethan was not at breakfast. Mrs. Hawthorne mentioned he had gone out early to check the far pastures with Peterson. The day passed without him, and Claire found herself listening for his step on the porch, the sound of his voice. She told herself it was only because he was her employer, the man who decided whether she stayed or went. But somewhere underneath that practical thought lived something else, something she was not ready to examine. He returned just before supper, dusty and tired. But instead of coming to the house, he disappeared into the barn. Claire watched through the window as lamplight flickered to life in the small workshop attached to the barn's east side. After the evening meal, after the dishes were washed and put away, Claire's curiosity got the better of her. She took a lantern and walked to the barn. The workshop door stood ajar. Through it she could see Ethan bent over a workbench, his hands moving steadily over something she could not quite make out. She knocked softly. Ethan looked up, surprise crossing his face. "Miss Morgan, do you need something?" "No, I saw the light. Wanted to make sure everything was all right." He straightened, wiping sawdust from his hands onto his pants. "Just working on something. Can't seem to settle tonight." Claire stepped inside. The workshop smelled of wood shavings and oil and honest work. Tools hung in neat rows on the walls. A half-finished project sat on the bench. 3 pieces of wood curved and sanded smooth. "What are you making?" Ethan hesitated, then gestured to the pieces. "A stool, 3 legs instead of 4, more stable on uneven ground." Understanding came slowly. The shape of it, the height, the way the seat was being padded with leather. "For the kitchen. The floor there is uneven. I noticed you use that old milking stool sometimes. Thought something better might help. More comfortable." His voice remained carefully neutral. "Just practical." But it was not practical. Or rather, it was practical in the way only real kindness could be. He had noticed her pain, had seen her struggle, and instead of pitying or ignoring, he had gone to his workshop and was building her something that might ease it. Claire felt her throat tighten. "That's very kind, Mr. Caldwell." "Ethan. When it's just us, you can call me Ethan." "Ethan." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that both pleased and frightened her. "Thank you. For this. For seeing." He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw an echo of her own loneliness. Two people who had learned to carry weight alone, unsure how to set it down, even when someone offered to help share the burden. "My father used to say that taking care of people wasn't about grand gestures. It was about noticing the small things, the places where life rubbed raw, and doing what you could to ease it." He sounds like he was a wise man. He was. I'm still trying to live up to what he taught me. Ethan picked up a piece of sandpaper and returned to smoothing the wood. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing any of it right." "The stool is right," Claire said softly. "Whatever else you doubt, know that." She left him there, working by lamplight, and returned to the house. But something had shifted between them, some acknowledgement that they saw each other. Not as employer and employee, not as the rancher and the cook, but as two people trying to navigate a world that had not always been kind to either of them. The next morning the stool appeared in the kitchen, 3 legs perfectly balanced, the seat padded with leather so soft it must have taken hours to work it smooth. Claire ran her fingers over it, feeling the care in every joint, every curve. Then she set it by the stove and got to work. By noon, when her leg began its familiar ache, she pulled the stool closer and sat. The height was perfect, the stability absolute even on the kitchen's uneven floor. She could work from here, stirring pots, rolling dough, doing everything that needed doing without the pain building to the point where it stole her breath. When Ethan came in for the midday meal, his eyes went to the stool, to Claire sitting on it, comfortable and steady. Their gazes met across the kitchen. No words passed between them, but his slight nod and her small smile in return said everything that needed saying. A week after Claire's arrival, Ethan saddled Copper and rode to Silverton. Business that could not wait, bills to settle, supplies to order, and though he did not say it aloud, a need to check on the debt, to see if the bank might extend more time or better terms. Tommy wanted to come, but Ethan left him with instructions to help Peterson. The boy was learning fast. Another few years, and he would make a fine ranch hand, maybe even a foreman someday if he wanted it. The ride to town gave Ethan time to think. Dangerous thing, thinking. It led to places a man might be better off avoiding, like the way his pulse quickened now when he entered the kitchen and found Claire there. The way he had started timing his coffee breaks to coincide with moments when she might need something from a high shelf or a heavy pot moved, not because she could not manage, but because helping her had become the best part of his day. Fool. He was a fool, and he knew it. She had been at the ranch barely 4 days. She worked for him, and even if none of that mattered, even if she might somehow see him as something other than her employer, what could he offer a failing ranch? A brother who resented him, debt that kept him awake at night. No woman deserved that burden, least of all one who had already carried more than her share. Silverton was busy when he arrived. Saturday meant miners came down from the hills with money in their pockets and thirst in their throats. The saloons would be full by nightfall. Ethan had no interest in any of that. He tied Copper outside the bank and went in. The interior was cool and dim after the bright street. Mr. Webster, the banker, looked up from his desk and waved Ethan over. Webster was 50, balding with spectacles that made his eyes look too large for his face, but he was fair. That counted for more than most things. "Ethan, I was hoping you'd come in." Ethan's stomach tightened. "That sounds ominous." "Sit, please." Ethan sat. Webster shuffled papers on his desk, a gesture Ethan recognized as nerves. Finally the banker looked up. "Your debt is due in 45 days. "I know. $340 plus the land patent fee of $125. "I know that too. The fall harvest should bring in enough to cover it, maybe even a bit extra." Webster paused. "But that's assuming the cattle are in good condition, assuming the drought doesn't worsen, assuming prices hold steady." "A lot of assumptions." "Yes. Webster leaned forward. "Ethan, I'm going to be straight with you because your father was a friend. Frank Harker has made an offer to buy your debt." The words landed like a fist. "What?" "He came in 3 days ago, offered to pay the full amount plus 20% above, said he'd hold the debt himself, give you more flexible terms." "That's generous of him," Ethan said, his voice flat. "That's what I thought. Too generous." Webster removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief. "I turned him down. Told him I had no interest in selling. But Ethan, if you miss the payment, I'll have no choice. The bank's directors will insist I sell to whoever offers the best terms, and Harker's terms would be the best. Except they wouldn't be flexible at all." "No, I suspect not." Webster put his spectacles back on. "There's something else. Harker's been asking questions about your land patent, about the survey boundaries from when your father first filed." "Why?" "That I don't know, but he had a lawyer with him, expensive one from the look of his suit. Denver, probably." Ethan's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "My father filed everything proper. The boundaries are clear." "I'm sure they are, but legal challenges don't require merit, just money and a willingness to tie things up in court." Webster's expression turned sympathetic. "Be careful, Ethan. Harker wants your land. He's patient, and he's got resources you don't. Don't give him an opening." Ethan left the bank feeling like the walls were closing in. 45 days. A debt that could be sold to his enemy. Questions about boundaries that should be settled. And underneath it all, the knowledge that one bad break, one piece of bad luck, could unravel everything his father had built. He was crossing the street toward the Mercantile when a voice stopped him. "Ethan Caldwell, been hoping to run into you." Ethan turned. Frank Harker stood on the boardwalk outside the Silver Bell Saloon. He was a big man, nearly Ethan's height, but carrying more weight. Prosperous weight, the kind that came from good meals and easy living. His clothes were expensive, his boots polished to a shine that would last about 10 minutes on a working ranch. Harker. Now is that any way to greet a neighbor? Harker descended the steps and approached, his hand extended. Ethan shook it because refusing would have been childish. Harker's grip was firm, his smile pleasant. "I hear you're having some water troubles out at Iron Ridge." "Nothing I can't handle." Of course. "You Caldwells are tough. Your father proved that." Harker's expression turned somber. "A good man, your father. His death was a loss to this whole valley." "Yes. But the thing about loss, Ethan, is that it creates opportunity. Not in a bad way, just in a practical sense." Harker gestured toward the saloon. "Buy you a drink." "We should talk." "I don't drink before sundown." "Coffee, then. The hotel has decent coffee." Ethan wanted to refuse, wanted to walk away and never speak to this man again. But refusing a conversation would accomplish nothing except making him look scared. And he was not scared. Wary, yes. Angry, certainly. But not scared. "Coffee," he agreed. They walked to the Silverton Hotel and took a table in the dining room. A waitress brought coffee and left them alone. Harker doctored his with cream and sugar. Ethan drank his black. "I'll be direct," Harker said. "I want to buy Iron Ridge. It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price. I'm offering $3,000 for your full section. 640 acres, buildings included." It was more than a fair price. More than fair, actually. Ethan's mind did the calculation automatically. $3,000 would pay his debt, complete the patent on land he would no longer own, and leave him with over $2,000. Enough to start over somewhere else. Buy a small place, maybe in California or Oregon. Live without the constant pressure that had been crushing him since his father died. "No," Ethan said. Harker's smile did not falter. "You haven't heard my reasons." "Don't need to. Iron Ridge has been in my family 20 years. My father built it from nothing. I won't be the one who gives it up. Even if keeping it means losing it anyway." Harker leaned forward. "Your father owed my father money, Ethan. $500 borrowed in the winter of 1870. Never repaid." The world seemed to tilt. "That's a lie." "I have the promissory note." Harker reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, set it on the table between them. Signed by your father. Witnessed by Tom Mitchell, who has since passed on. $500 at 8% interest compounding annually. That debt is now $640. Ethan stared at the paper. His father's signature, or something that looked like it was scrawled at the bottom. The date was clear. January 15th, 1870, 5 years ago. My father never borrowed from yours. Are you sure men in hard times make hard choices? Maybe he was ashamed to tell you. Maybe he planned to pay it back before anyone knew. Or maybe you forged this. Ethan pushed the paper back across the table. I don't know what game you're playing, Harker, but I won't be part of it. Harker's pleasant expression finally cracked, showing something colder underneath. No game, Caldwell, just business. Your father made a promise. Now that promise falls to you. I'm willing to be reasonable. Sell me the ranch for $3,000. I'll forgive the debt. Everyone walks away clean. And if I don't? Then I file a claim in court, force a judgment. And when the bank sells your debt to me because you can't pay, I'll own Iron Ridge anyway, for a fraction of what I'm offering now. Harker stood, dropping coins on the table for the coffee. You've got 45 days to think about it. Choose wisely. He left. Ethan sat alone with cold coffee and colder fury. The promissory note still lay on the table. He picked it up, studying the signature. It looked like his father's hand, but his father would never have borrowed from a man like Harker, would never have left such a debt hanging over the family, which meant the note was forged. Had to be. But proving that would require lawyers and time and money Ethan did not have. He folded the note and put it in his pocket. Evidence. If nothing else, it was evidence of what he was up against. The ride back to Iron Ridge passed in a blur of anger and calculation. 45 days, a contested debt, questions about the land boundaries, Harker circling like a vulture, patient and certain of his eventual victory. Ethan reached the ranch as the sun touched the western peaks. The house looked solid and real in the golden light. His father's house, his father's land, his father's legacy that Ethan had sworn to protect. He unsaddled Copper and turned him into the corral, stood for a moment with his hands on the fence rail, trying to breathe around the weight in his chest. You look like you got kicked by a mule. Ethan turned. Blake stood a few feet away, his bruises faded enough now that he could move without wincing. He looked steadier than he had in days. Bad news in town, Ethan said. The debt? That. And Harker claims father owed him money, $500 from 1870. Has a promissory note to prove it. Blake went still. Father never borrowed from Harker. I know. So the note's fake. Probably. But proving it will cost money we don't have. Blake cursed softly, looked out toward the mountains where he had chased his stallion, where he had fallen and nearly killed himself. When he looked back at Ethan, something had changed in his face. Something harder and more focused. What do you need me to do? The question caught Ethan off guard. What? To save the ranch. What do you need me to do? It was the first time in months, maybe years, that Blake had asked that question. The first time he had offered help instead of resistance. I don't know yet, Ethan admitted. I need to think. Plan. Well, when you figure it out, tell me. I'll help. Blake turned toward the house, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About the stallion, about being reckless, about making things harder when they were already hard enough. He walked away before Ethan could respond. Left Ethan standing alone in the gathering dusk, trying to process what had just happened. Inside, the kitchen glowed with lamplight. Through the window, Ethan could see Claire moving between stove and table, preparing supper. Her movements were practiced now, efficient. She had learned the space in a week, the way some people never learned it in years. He entered through the back door. Claire looked up, her hands covered in flour from the dough she was kneading. You're back, she said. Then, seeing his face, what's wrong? Nothing you need to worry about. I wasn't worrying. I was observing. She wiped her hands on her apron. You look like a man who got bad news and is trying to decide whether to fight or flee. Her directness surprised him. Most people danced around difficult topics, but Claire apparently had no patience for dancing. Town was complicated, he said. Most things worth doing are complicated. Ethan moved to the stove where coffee stayed warm, poured a cup and drank it despite the heat. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "When things get hard, when it feels like the world is pushing you into a corner, how do you keep going?" Claire's hands stilled in the dough. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I remind myself that I've survived every hard day before this one. That survival isn't pretty or noble or anything the songs talk about. It's just waking up and doing the next thing, and then the thing after that, until enough next things add up to a life." That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also the only way I know. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, at the strength in her hands and the set of her jaw, at the way she stood, despite the pain he knew her leg caused, at the quiet courage it must have taken to leave everything familiar and come to this strange place, to trust a man she did not know, to keep his word about a job. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "So are you, Mr. Caldwell. You just carry so much that you've forgotten you're also allowed to set some of it down occasionally." Before he could respond, the door burst open. Tommy rushed in, his face flushed with running. "Mr. Caldwell Peterson says you need to come quick. Storm's building. Big one." Ethan set down his coffee and followed the boy outside. The western sky, which had been clear an hour ago, now boiled with dark clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance. The air pressure had dropped that unmistakable feeling that came before serious weather. Peterson appeared from the barn. "Barometer's falling fast, boss. This is going to be bad." The hands were already moving without being told, securing equipment, bringing horses into the barn, battening down anything that might blow away. Ethan joined them, his mind racing through the list of things that needed doing. It was not until the work was mostly done that he realized Blake was not there. "Where's Blake?" he asked Peterson. The old foreman's face went grim. "He rode out this morning, before you left for town. Said something about checking the high pasture. In this, he'll be caught in it. I tried to stop him. He wouldn't listen." Of course he would not. Blake never listened when it mattered most. The storm hit with sudden fury. Wind screamed down from the mountains, bending trees nearly double. Rain followed, not the gentle spring rain of a week ago, but sheets of water driven horizontal by the wind. Thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud it rattled the windows. Ethan stood on the porch, scanning the darkness for any sign of a rider. Nothing. Just storm and night, and the terrible knowledge that Blake was out in this somewhere alone. "He'll find shelter," Mrs. Hawthorne said from the doorway. She had appeared silently the way she did. "That boy knows this land." "Not as well as he thinks he does." "Then you'll go find him." It was not a question. Ethan looked at the older woman who had known him all his life, who had delivered him, raised him, stood by him through everything. "The ranch needs me here. The ranch will survive a storm. Your brother might not." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You've carried the weight of this family since your parents died, carried it without complaint, but some weights require letting go of everything else to bear. Blake is that weight. Go find him." Ethan knew she was right, knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat. Blake was out there. Blake might be hurt, might be dying, and no amount of ranch work mattered more than that. He turned toward the barn. Claire appeared beside him with a slicker and a lantern. "You'll need these," she said. "I can't ask you to wait up." "You're not asking. I'm deciding." Her eyes, steady on his, held something he could not quite name. "Be careful." Ethan took the slicker and lantern. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a brief contact that somehow felt like a promise. Then he was moving toward the barn, into the storm, into the darkness where his brother was lost. The wind tried to tear the barn doors from his hands. Inside, the horses stamped nervously. Ethan saddled Copper quickly, his hands sure despite the urgency hammering through him. The gelding sensed his mood moving restlessly as Ethan secured the rifle to the saddle and packed emergency supplies in the saddlebags. He led Copper outside. The rain immediately soaked through the slicker. Lightning illuminated the yard in stark white flashes. Peterson appeared at his side, having to shout to be heard over the wind. "Take Johnson and Riley." "No need, every hand here to keep things secure. "Boss, you can't go alone." "I won't be gone long." Ethan swung into the saddle. "If I'm not back by dawn, send someone to town for help." He did not wait for Peterson's response. Kicked Copper into motion, heading north toward the high country where Blake had said he was going. The trail was treacherous mud-slick and rocks hidden by standing water. But Copper was sure-footed, and Ethan knew these paths by heart. He could ride them in darkness. Had to ride them in darkness because Blake was somewhere ahead alone and possibly hurt. The hours blurred together. Rain, lightning, the struggle to stay in the saddle as Copper picked his way through terrain that grew rougher with each mile. Ethan's mind filled with images he could not stop. Blake thrown from his horse. Blake unconscious in the rain. Blake calling for help that would not come. "Please." The prayer came unbidden. "Let him be alive. Let me find him. I'll do better. I'll let go. I'll stop trying to control everything. Just let him be alive." The trail rose steeply, climbing toward the ridge. Ethan urged Copper forward despite the danger. Lightning struck close enough that he felt the air crackle, close enough that his hair stood on end. But he pushed on. And then, in a flash of lightning, he saw it. A riderless horse, Blake's sorrel mare, standing with reins trailing. The mare's head came up as Copper approached. She whinnied high and frightened. Ethan dismounted and caught her reins. The saddle was empty. He looked around frantically, his lantern casting wild shadows. "Blake?" His voice was lost in the storm. "Blake?" Nothing. He led both horses forward, searching the ground for tracks for any sign. The lightning came again, and in its brief light he saw something that made his blood freeze. The edge of a ravine just ahead, and tracks leading right to it. Ethan tied the horses and moved to the edge on hands and knees. The ravine dropped 30 feet to a rocky bottom. In the darkness and rain he could barely make out anything below. But then lightning flared again and he saw him, Blake lying motionless at the bottom, his right leg bent at a wrong angle, blood black in the lightning covering his face. Ethan did not remember making the decision, did not remember starting the climb down. Later he would recall only fragments, the slick rocks under his hands, the way the rope from his saddlebag cut into his palms, the drop when his foot slipped and he fell the last 10 feet, landing hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. He crawled to Blake, pressed fingers to his brother's neck, searching for a pulse, found it weak but steady. Relief so intense it was almost painful flooded through him. "Blake, Blake, can you hear me?" No response. Blake's breathing was shallow, his skin cold. Ethan did a quick assessment the way he had learned in the army during the war. Right leg broken definitely, head wound bleeding sluggishly, ribs possibly damaged, but alive. Blake was alive. Getting him out would be nearly impossible. The ravine was steep, the rocks slick. Blake was unconscious, dead weight, but impossible was just another word for things that had to be done anyway. Ethan rigged a makeshift splint for Blake's leg using branches and his belt, bound the head wound with strips torn from his shirt. Then, inch by painful inch, he began the work of hauling his brother up the ravine wall. His shoulder dislocated halfway up. Ethan felt it go, felt the grinding pop and the white-hot pain. He screamed into the storm, braced himself, and shoved the joint back into its socket. The pain made his vision gray at the edges, but he kept climbing. By the time he reached the top with Blake, Ethan's hands were bleeding. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. His clothes were torn, his body battered. But he had Blake, had his brother alive and breathing. He managed to get Blake across Copper's saddle, securing him with rope. The mare followed as they started the long journey home, Ethan walking and leading Copper because the horse could not carry both men. The storm raged. The night pressed close, and Ethan walked one step and then another, talking to Blake, though his brother could not hear. "Stay with me. You stay with me, you hear? I'm sorry. Sorry for holding too tight. Sorry for not seeing what you needed. Just stay. Just live. We'll figure out the rest." The words came out in a steady stream, half prayer and half promise. Miles passed. The rain continued. Ethan's legs threatened to give out, but he forced them to keep moving. Dawn was breaking gray and cold when he finally saw the ranch buildings ahead. Figures emerged from the house running toward him. Peterson, Tommy, Mrs. Hawthorne. And Claire, her hair loose, her face white with worry that transformed into relief when she saw him. "He's alive," Ethan said. His voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. "Broken leg, head wound, but alive." They took Blake from him, carried him toward the house, moving with urgent efficiency. Ethan tried to follow and nearly fell. Claire was there, her arm around his waist, supporting him despite her own limp. "Come on," she said. "One more step, then another. You can do this." Her voice, steady and certain, pulled him forward. Into the house, up the stairs, to Blake's room where they were already working on his brother. Then down to the kitchen where Mrs. Hawthorne pressed a cup of something hot and strong into his hands. "Drink." Ethan drank. Whiskey and coffee, bitter and burning. The world slowly came back into focus. "You saved him," Claire said. She sat beside him at the table, her presence solid and real. "You saved your brother." "Don't know that yet." "I do." Her hand covered his on the table, warm despite everything. "You went into that storm when any sensible person would have waited. You climbed down a ravine in darkness. You carried him back. That's not luck. That's love." Ethan looked at her, at this woman who had been in his life barely 2 weeks, but somehow understood things he had never said aloud. And for the first time in months, maybe years, he let himself feel it. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. "Stay," he said, not sure if he meant for her to stay at the table, or stay at the ranch, or stay in his life. Just stay. "I'm not going anywhere," Claire said. And in that moment, with dawn breaking cold and gray outside, and his brother fighting for life upstairs, Ethan Caldwell finally understood what his father had tried to teach him. That asking for help was not weakness, that letting people in was not surrender, that sometimes the strongest thing a man could do was admit he could not carry everything alone. The weight was still there, the debt, the ranch, the future uncertain and frightening. But for the first time, Ethan felt like maybe he would not have to bear it all himself. Blake did not wake. 3 hours after Ethan carried him into the house, after they had cleaned the blood and bound the wounds and set the broken leg as best they could, Blake remained unconscious. His breathing stayed shallow but steady. His face beneath the bruises and cuts looked years younger, vulnerable in a way Ethan had not seen since Blake was a child. The doctor arrived mid-morning, having ridden through mud that threatened to swallow his buggy whole. Dr. Morrison was 60 if he was a day, with hands that trembled slightly until they touched a patient. Then they became steady as stone. He examined Blake in silence, his weathered face giving nothing away. Ethan stood by the window, unable to sit, unable to look away. Claire had brought coffee an hour ago. It sat untouched on the dresser, long since cold. Finally, Dr. Morrison straightened and turned to face Ethan. "The leg is cleanly broken. You said it well. It should heal straight if he stays off it for 6 weeks minimum. And his head? Severe concussion, possibly more. The skull appears intact, but there's no way to know what's happening inside." The doctor's voice was kind but honest. He could wake in an hour, or a day, or a week, or he might not wake at all. The words landed like blows. Ethan's hands gripped the window frame hard enough that the wood creaked. "What can we do?" "Keep him warm. Keep the wounds clean. Watch for fever. If infection sets in, send for me immediately." Beyond that, Morrison placed his instruments back in his bag with the careful precision of a man who had done this too many times. "Pray if you're the praying sort, and talk to him. Sometimes they can hear us, even when they can't respond. Sometimes a familiar voice is the thread that leads them back." After the doctor left, Ethan pulled a chair to Blake's bedside and sat. The house moved around him, footsteps on the stairs, voices in the kitchen, the ordinary sounds of life continuing while his brothers hung suspended. Mrs. Hawthorne came and went, checking Blake's bandages, feeling his forehead for fever. Peterson appeared once, hat in hands, his old face creased with worry. "Anything I can do, boss?" "Keep the ranch running. I'll be here." "For how long?" As long as it takes." Peterson nodded once and left. Ethan heard him on the stairs giving quiet orders to the other hands. The work would continue. It always did. Cattle needed feeding fences, needed mending water, needed checking. A ranch did not pause for crisis. But Ethan could not make himself leave this room, could not make himself look away from Blake's still face. The weight of it pressed down on his chest until breathing became work. If Blake died, it would be Ethan's fault. All his strictness, all his demands, all his attempts to control had driven Blake to this, had made him so desperate for freedom that he would chase wild horses through storms. "I'm sorry." The words came out hoarse. "I'm sorry I held so tight. Sorry I treated you like a boy when you were a man. Sorry I made duty feel like chains." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. "Just wake up. Please, wake up and I'll do better. I'll let go. I'll trust you to find your own way. Just come back." Blake's chest rose and fell, rose and fell. The only answer Ethan received. Afternoon faded to evening. Claire brought food that Ethan did not eat. Night pressed against the windows. Mrs. Hawthorne lit the lamps, their warm glow pushing back the darkness, but not the fear. Somewhere past midnight, footsteps on the stairs announced a visitor. Ethan looked up to find Claire in the doorway, holding a cup of something that steamed in the lamplight. "Tea," she said, "with honey and whiskey. Mrs. Hawthorne's remedy for shock." "I'm not in shock." "You climbed down a ravine in a storm, dislocated your shoulder, and carried your brother 3 miles. Then you sat here for 14 hours without eating or sleeping. That's shock." She moved into the room and set the cup on the bedside table. "Drink it, or I'll tell Mrs. Hawthorne you refused, and she'll come up here and make you drink it, and that will be far less pleasant for everyone." Despite everything, Ethan felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. He picked up the cup and drank. The tea was sweet and strong, burning pleasantly down his throat. Claire settled into the other chair, the one by the window. Her presence was quiet but solid. After a moment she spoke. "When I was 9, my younger sister fell through ice on the river. The current took her under. By the time they pulled her out, she wasn't breathing." Claire's voice was steady but distant, as if she was seeing something far away. "They worked on her for what felt like hours, pushed on her chest, breathed into her lungs. Nothing. And then, just when everyone had given up, she coughed, opened her eyes, lived. What happened to her? She's in Ohio now, married to a miller, has 3 children. Claire looked at Ethan, then her green eyes steady. "The point is, people surprise us. They come back when we think they're lost. They survive when we think they won't. Blake is strong. Give him time." "We don't have time. The ranch, the debt, everything is falling apart, and I can't hold it together alone." "You're not alone." The words were simple but weighted with meaning. "You have Mrs. Hawthorne, Peterson, Tommy, the hands, me." She paused. "Let us help." Ethan wanted to argue, to explain that it was his responsibility, his burden to bear. But exhaustion had worn his defenses thin. And something in Claire's face, something in the way she sat there despite her own pain, despite having known him barely 2 weeks, made him want to believe. "I don't know how to ask for help," he admitted. "Then don't ask. Just stop saying no when it's offered." She stayed with him through the dark hours, talking quietly when the silence became too heavy, falling silent when words would have been too much. At some point Ethan dozed, his head dropping forward. When he jerked awake, dawn light was creeping through the window, and Claire was gone. But a blanket had been draped over his shoulders, warm and soft. The second day passed like the first. Blake breathed, but did not wake. His color remained pale, his sleep unnatural and deep. Dr. Morrison returned in the afternoon, examined his patient, and left instructions that changed nothing. "Keep doing what you're doing. That's all anyone can do." Ethan split his time between Blake's room and the ranch. An hour at his brother's bedside, then down to handle urgent business, then back upstairs. Peterson reported that the storm had damaged some fencing and flooded the lower pasture, but nothing they could not repair. The cattle were secure, the hands were managing. Tommy appeared in Blake's doorway that evening, his young face solemn. "Can I sit with him, Mr. Caldwell? Just for a bit?" Ethan nodded, too tired to speak. The boy pulled up a chair and sat his hands folded in his lap as if keeping vigil was something he had done before. Probably had Ethan realized. Tommy's father had taken 3 days to die after the fever struck. The boy knew how to wait beside a sick bed, knew how to hope while preparing for the worst. After a while Tommy spoke, not to Ethan but to Blake. "You should wake up, Mr. Blake. Your brother's wearing himself out worrying, and Miss Morgan keeps making extra food hoping you'll eat it. The whole ranch feels wrong with you just lying here." The boy's voice wavered slightly. "When my pa was sick, I used to tell him stories about things I'd seen or done. Ma said maybe it helped him know we were there. Want me to tell you a story?" Ethan listened as Tommy talked about a coyote he had seen that morning, about how Peterson was teaching him to braid leather, about the new colt in the barn that nobody had named yet. Simple things, the fabric of ordinary life. But Tommy told them with such earnest hope that they became more than ordinary. They became reasons to come back. When the boy finally left, Ethan found his own voice. "He's right. The ranch feels wrong without you." He ran a hand through his hair, searching for words. "I know I made you feel trapped, made you think this place was a cage, but it was never meant to be that. Father built Iron Ridge as a promise that our family would have something solid, something that could weather storms and drought and hard times, something worth fighting for." He paused, collecting his scattered thoughts. "But I forgot that promises can't be forced. They have to be chosen. And I never gave you the choice, just told you this was your responsibility and expected you to be grateful." His voice caught. "I'm sorry for that. Sorry for treating your dreams like they didn't matter. Sorry for being too afraid of losing you to trust you to come back on your own." Blake's chest rose and fell, but was it Ethan's imagination, or had his brother's breathing changed slightly, become less shallow? The third day broke gray and cold. A late spring frost had settled overnight, painting the grass silver. Ethan woke in the chair beside Blake's bed, his neck stiff and his shoulder aching from the dislocation. He was too old to sleep sitting up. Had been too old for years, if he was being honest. Blake looked the same, pale, still. The bruises on his face had darkened to purple and green, dramatic against his skin, but his breathing seemed steadier, stronger. Ethan rose and stretched, wincing as his joints protested. He needed to check on the ranch, needed to make decisions about the fencing repairs and the cattle rotation and a dozen other things that could not wait forever. He was halfway to the door when he heard it, a sound so soft he might have imagined it. A groan. Ethan spun back. Blake's eyelids were moving, not opening yet, but fluttering. His right hand twitched against the quilt. "Blake." Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside the bed. "Blake, can you hear me?" Another groan, slightly louder. Then Blake's eyes cracked open. Unfocused at first, seeing nothing. Then slowly, painfully, they found Ethan's face. "Did I catch the horse?" Blake's voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse. Relief hit Ethan so hard it stole his breath. He let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "No, you idiot! The horse threw you into a ravine." "That would explain why everything hurts." "Everything should hurt. You're lucky to be alive." Blake's eyes drifted closed again, but this time Ethan could tell it was natural sleep, not the deep unconsciousness that had held him for 3 days. His breathing evened out his face, relaxing. Ethan stayed kneeling beside the bed, one hand on Blake's shoulder, and let himself feel the full weight of what had almost happened. He had almost lost his brother, almost lost the only family he had left, and all because he had been too stubborn, too controlling, too afraid to let Blake be his own man. Never again. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, Ethan would do better, would be better. When he finally stood, his legs unsteady beneath him, he found Mrs. Hawthorne in the doorway. Tears streaked her weathered face, but she was smiling. "Praise be," she whispered. "I'll make broth. He'll need strength." The house came alive with the news. Peterson heard it from Mrs. Hawthorne and spread word to the hands. Tommy whooped loud enough to scare the chickens. Even the ranch seemed to breathe easier, as if the land itself had been holding tension that could finally release. Claire was in the kitchen up to her elbows in bread dough when Ethan found her. She looked up, saw his face, and her hands stilled. "He's awake." The smile that broke across her face was like sunrise. "Oh, thank God. Is he lucid? Does he know you?" He asked if he caught the horse, so yes, definitely himself. Claire laughed, and the sound filled something hollow in Ethan's chest that he had not realized was there. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward him, then stopped uncertain, as if she wanted to touch him to celebrate with him, but was not sure if she had the right. Ethan closed the distance between them, pulled her into a hug that was probably inappropriate and definitely unprofessional, but felt more necessary than breathing. She stiffened in surprise, then melted against him, her arms coming around his waist. "Thank you," he said into her hair, "for staying, for being here, for everything. You don't need to thank me for caring." Her voice was muffled against his chest, but he heard every word clearly. They stood like that for a long moment, neither moving. Then footsteps on the stairs made them step apart. But something had shifted between them, some acknowledgement that they had moved past employer and employee into territory neither could quite name yet. Blake's recovery was slow but steady. By evening he could sit up without getting dizzy. By the next morning he was demanding real food instead of Mrs. Hawthorne's broth. By the third day after waking he was irritable with being confined to bed and making everyone around him suffer for it. "I need to get up, need to move. This is torture." "Doctor said 6 weeks off that leg," Ethan reminded him for the 10th time that day. "You want it to heal crooked. I want to do something other than stare at these same 4 walls. Then stare at different walls. We can move you downstairs if you promise to stay on the couch." Blake agreed with such alacrity that Ethan knew he had been played. But he did not care. Blake was alive, was healing, was himself again. Everything else felt manageable compared to that. They got him downstairs with help from Peterson and Johnson, settling him on the couch in the front room where windows looked out over the ranch. Blake propped his broken leg on pillows and accepted a book from Mrs. Hawthorne with reasonably good grace. "You look terrible," Blake said, studying Ethan's face. "Been a rough few days. Because of me. Because of a lot of things. You're just one item on a long list." Blake was quiet for a moment, his fingers worrying at the edge of his blanket. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its defensive edge. "I heard you. While I was under. I heard you talking." Ethan's chest tightened. "What did you hear?" "That you were sorry, that you'd do better, that you'd let go." Blake met his eyes. "Did you mean it?" "Every word. Even if letting go means watching me leave." The question hung between them, heavy with years of unspoken resentment and love tangled together. Ethan took a breath, reaching for honesty instead of the comfortable lie. "If you need to leave to find yourself, then yes. Even that." Blake's eyes went bright. He looked away, blinking rapidly. "I thought you'd fight me. Thought you'd find a way to make me stay." "I probably would have. Before. But nearly losing you changed some things. Made me realize I'd rather have you alive and far away than dead from trying to escape." Ethan moved to the window, looking out at the land his father had built. "This ranch was Father's dream. I made it mine because someone had to, but it doesn't have to be yours. What if I want it to be?" The words came quiet, almost shy. "Not forever, but for now. While you deal with Harker and the debt and the patent. You can't fight that battle alone." Ethan turned, searching Blake's face for signs of obligation or resentment. Found only sincerity. "You'd stay, even knowing you're free to go." "I'd stay because I'm free to go. There's a difference." Blake shifted on the couch, wincing as his broken leg protested. "I spent so long fighting against what you wanted that I never figured out what I wanted. Maybe it's time I did that. And maybe the best place to do that is here, helping save the place that's been home my whole life." Something in Ethan's chest unclenched, Not relief exactly, more like the releasing of a fist that had been clenched so long he had forgotten it was closed. After harvest, if you still want to leave, I'll help you. Money for supplies, a horse, whatever you need. After harvest, if I still want to leave, I'll take you up on that. Blake smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. But Ethan, thank you. For coming after me. For not giving up. For being a stubborn bastard who wouldn't let me die in that ravine. That's what brothers do. Yeah. Blake's voice went rough. That's what brothers do. Claire appeared with tea and sandwiches, tactfully pretending she had not heard their conversation. But her eyes met Ethan's over Blake's head, and the warmth in them told him she understood. Understood what it cost to let go. Understood what it meant to receive grace you did not deserve. The days began to settle into a new rhythm. Blake Heald graduated from couch to crutches, from crutches to a cane. He moved carefully, but with increasing confidence. And true to his word, he asked how he could help. Ethan gave him the accounts to review, inventory to organize, small tasks that could be done from a chair. Blake attacked them with focus Ethan had not seen from him in years, as if proving something to himself as much as to his brother. But the larger problems remained. The debt, the patent, Harker's forged promissory note, and his lawyer's questions about property boundaries. 37 days left now, time bleeding away like water through cupped hands. Worse, the drought had intensified. The creek that fed Iron Ridge continued to dwindle. Ethan spent hours walking the property with Peterson, searching for springs or seeps that might have gone undiscovered. Found nothing promising. One afternoon he stood at the creek's edge with Tommy, showing the boy how low the water had fallen. At this rate we'll be dry in 2 weeks, maybe 3. Can't keep cattle without water. Could we dig a new well? Tommy asked. Tried twice. Hit bedrock at 40 feet both times. Would cost more to go deeper than we have to spend. What about those water witchers, the ones who use willow branches? Ethan smiled despite his worry. That's superstition, Tommy. Doesn't really work. My grandpa swore by it, said he found water when nobody else could. Peterson, who had been listening, spoke up. My grandfather was a dowser too, watched him do it dozens of times. Some say it's nonsense, but I seen things that made me wonder. Even if it worked, we don't have time to search the whole ranch. Maybe not the whole ranch, but the north section near that rocky outcrop, soil's different there, darker. Sometimes that means water's close. Ethan looked at the old foreman. Peterson had been on this land 20 years. If he had an instinct about where water might hide, it was worth considering. All right, tomorrow we'll check it out. Can't hurt to try. What Ethan did not know was that Claire had been standing in the kitchen doorway close enough to hear every word. That evening, after the hands had eaten and dispersed, Claire found Peterson in the barn. The old man was cleaning tack, his weathered hands moving with the ease of long practice. Mr. Peterson, could I speak with you? He looked up surprised. Of course, Miss Morgan. Something wrong? No, I wanted to ask about water dousing. You said your grandfather did it? Peterson's eyebrows rose. He did. Why? I overheard you and Mr. Caldwell talking. About the water shortage, about trying the north section. Claire moved closer, her voice dropping. Could you teach me how to douse? Miss Morgan, I'm not sure that's wise. Ethan's skeptical of it. That's why I want to try when he's not watching. If it doesn't work, no harm done. He never needs to know. But if it does work, if we find water, then it doesn't matter whether he believed in it beforehand. Peterson studied her for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. You've got sand, miss. I'll give you that. All right. Meet me tomorrow after breakfast. We'll see if you've got the touch for it. They started the next morning while Ethan was occupied with Blake's physical therapy and the hands were scattered across the property. Peterson cut a Y-shaped branch from a willow tree, demonstrated how to hold it, how to walk slowly, and let the branch move on its own. Don't force it, don't expect it. Just walk and feel. Some folks have the sensitivity, some don't. It's like being able to hear a note nobody else can hear. Claire took the branch, her hands where Peterson indicated. The wood felt alive in her grip, springy and responsive. She began to walk across the north section, the ground uneven beneath her uneven gait. Nothing happened for the first hour. The branch remained still. Peterson watched without comment, letting her work at her own pace. Then, as she passed near a cluster of rocks, something changed. The branch trembled in her hands. Not much, just a quiver, but it was movement she had not caused. "There," Peterson said quietly. "You felt that?" "I think so. Should I keep going?" "Mark this spot, then keep searching. See if it gets stronger anywhere else." They worked through the morning. Tommy discovered them around noon, and after swearing to secrecy, joined their search. 3 people walking back and forth across the north section, looking for water that might not exist. And then Claire felt it. A pull so strong it nearly yanked the branch from her hands. She gasped, stumbling slightly. "Here, right here. Something's here." Peterson came over, took the branch, walked the same path. His eyes widened. "I'll be damned. You're right. There's something strong underneath here." "How deep?" "No way to know without digging. Could be 10 feet, could be 50. Tommy was practically bouncing with excitement. "We should tell Mr. Caldwell." "Not yet," Claire said. "Not until we're sure. Can we dig a test hole just deep enough to see if there's actually water?" Peterson hesitated. "That's a lot of work for something that might be nothing." "Then let's make it something." Claire's jaw set with determination. "I'll dig, or help dig, however long it takes." The old foreman laughed. "Miss Morgan, you're either crazy or the bravest woman I've met. Maybe both. All right, we'll dig, but quiet-like. If Ethan finds out we're wasting time on water witching, he'll put a stop to it faster than a snake strike." They began the next day. Peterson brought shovels and picks from the barn when Ethan was occupied elsewhere. Tommy helped whenever his chores allowed. Claire worked too, though her leg limited how long she could stand. Between the 3 of them, they managed an hour or 2 of digging each day, carefully covering their work when they heard anyone approaching. 10 feet down, the soil was still dry. 20 feet, and they hit damp earth. Encouraging, but not definitive. 30 feet, and doubt began to creep in. Peterson's back was complaining. Tommy's hands blistered. Claire's leg throbbed constantly from the standing and the shoveling. "Maybe we should tell Mr. Caldwell," Tommy said. "Get more help, make it go faster." "1 more day," Claire said. "If we don't find anything tomorrow, we'll tell him." 35 feet down, water began to seep into the hole. 37 feet, and it gushed up cold and clear and abundant. Enough flow that they could not bail it out faster than it filled. Peterson let out a whoop that probably carried to the house. Tommy yelled loud enough to wake the dead. And Claire sat down in the grass and laughed until tears ran down her face. They had found water. Against all odds, through sheer stubborn determination and willingness to look foolish, they had found water. "We have to tell him now," Peterson said. "This changes everything." Claire nodded, suddenly nervous. Would Ethan be angry they had worked behind his back? Would he dismiss the discovery because of how they had found it? Only one way to find out. They found Ethan in the barn, checking on a pregnant mare. He looked up as they approached, immediately sensing something was different. "What happened? Someone hurt?" "No, boss, but you need to come see something." Ethan followed them across the property to the north section. They led him to the hole, now filled nearly to the top with water. Clear, cold water that had not been there 2 weeks ago. "What is this?" Ethan knelt beside the hole, cupped his hands, brought water to his lips. Tasted it. "This is good water. How deep?" 37 feet, Peterson said. "We dug 37 feet and didn't find water before." "Different spot, boss?" "Miss Morgan doused for it." Ethan's head snapped up. "Doused?" Claire stepped forward, lifting her chin despite the anxiety fluttering in her stomach. "I overheard you and Mr. Peterson talking about the water shortage, about trying the north section. I asked him to teach me dousing. We've been working on this for nearly 2 weeks." "Why didn't you tell me?" because you thought it was superstition, and maybe it is, but it worked." She gestured to the hole full of water. "This is real. This could save the ranch." Ethan stood slowly, his eyes moving from the water to Claire, to Peterson, to Tommy. Emotions played across his face too quickly to read. Surprise, confusion, and then unexpectedly, something that looked like relief. "You did this," he said to Claire, "while I was dealing with Blake and the debt and everything else. You were out here digging." "We all were. Mr. Peterson and Tommy helped. But it was your idea, your stubbornness." Claire could not tell if he was angry or not. His voice gave nothing away. "Are you upset?" "Upset." Ethan looked at her like she had said something in a foreign language. "Claire, you just saved Iron Ridge. Why would I be upset?" Then he did something that shocked everyone present. He crossed the distance between them, placed his hands on her waist, and lifted her clean off the ground, spinning her in a circle before setting her down. For a moment he kept his hands on her waist, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "You saved the ranch," he said again, quieter this time. "When I couldn't figure out how, when I was drowning in problems, you found a solution. Found water where there shouldn't be water. You're amazing." Claire's cheeks flamed. "I had help. Mr. Peterson and Tommy did most of the digging." "We all helped," Peterson agreed. "But Miss Morgan's the one who had the courage to try when most folks would have said it was foolish." Tommy grinned. "Can we tell everyone now? This is the best secret I ever kept, but keeping it was hard." Ethan laughed, a sound Claire had not heard from him before, full and genuine and free from the weight he usually carried. "Yes, tell everyone. This calls for celebration." That night, after a supper where the hands had cheered and clapped and asked 100 questions about the water find, Claire sat on the kitchen steps, watching the sun set. Her leg ached fiercely from the week's work. Her hands were blistered despite the gloves. But satisfaction ran deeper than the pain. She had done something that mattered, had made a real difference in this place that was starting to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. Footsteps behind her announced Ethan's arrival. He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. 30 days, he said, until the debt is due, until everything comes down. The payment, the patent, Harker's forged note, all of it converging at once. But you have water now. That's one less problem. Thanks to you. He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were darker than usual. I keep trying to figure out how to thank you properly. Nothing seems adequate. You already thanked me, several times. Not enough. You came here as a cook. You've become, I don't know what the word is, essential necessary. Something this place and this family would be poorer without. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. She was suddenly painfully aware of how close he sat, how his shoulder pressed against hers, now warm and solid, how easy it would be to lean into him. I'm just doing what anyone would do. No, you're doing what someone with courage and compassion and stubborn determination does. Not everyone, not even most people. You. His hand moved to cover hers on the step. I'm glad you stayed. Glad you're here. So am I, Claire whispered. They sat like that as the sun finished setting, their hands touching, neither speaking, and Claire thought that maybe, just maybe, she had found more than a job when she came to Iron Ridge. Maybe she had found a place where her uneven steps did not make her less, where her strength was recognized and valued, where a man looked at her and saw not her limitations, but her capabilities, where she could finally, after so many years of running from pity and settling for tolerance, be seen. 3 weeks after the water discovery, Iron Ridge Ranch began to feel like a place that might survive. The new well flowed steady and strong. The cattle moved closer to the north section, drank their fill, and grew fat on summer grass. The hands worked with renewed energy, no longer haunted by the specter of drought. Blake had graduated from cane to walking unaided, though he still moved with careful deliberation. His recovery had brought more than physical healing. Something fundamental had shifted between the brothers. They worked side by side now without the tension that had poisoned the air for years, talked without the defensive edges that had made every conversation a potential battlefield. Ethan watched his brother organize the tool shed one morning and marveled at the change. Blake hummed while he worked. Actually hummed. When had Ethan last heard that sound from him? "You seem happy," Ethan observed. Blake looked up, a genuine smile on his face. "I am. Funny how nearly dying puts things in perspective." "Is that what did it?" "That. And you letting go." Blake set down the hammer he had been holding and faced Ethan fully. "I spent so long fighting against this place because I thought staying meant giving up who I was. But you gave me permission to leave, and suddenly I could see clearly. Could see what this ranch actually means instead of what I thought it meant." Ethan waited. Blake had more to say. The thoughtful expression on his face made that clear. "After harvest," Blake continued, "I'm going to California, going to try my hand at horse breeding. There's good money in it, and I'm good with horses. Always have been." The words should have hurt, should have felt like failure or abandonment. Instead, Ethan felt only pride. "You'll do well at it. You're not going to try to stop me. No, you're a man-grown Blake. Time I treated you like one." Ethan clapped his brother on the shoulder. "But I'll miss you. The ranch will miss you." Blake's eyes went bright. "I'll visit, and write, and who knows, maybe someday I'll come back for good. But right now I need to see what I can do on my own terms." "I understand." And Ethan did. Finally, completely, he understood. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Blake spoke again, his tone carefully casual. "So when are you going to do something about Claire?" Ethan's hands stilled on the rope he was coiling. "What do you mean?" "Come on, Ethan. I've seen the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. Everyone on this ranch has seen it. Hell, the cattle have probably noticed. She works for me. It wouldn't be proper." Blake laughed outright. "Since when do you care about proper? You climbed down a ravine in a lightning storm to save my stupid hide. You let a woman douse for water when every sensible part of you thought it was nonsense. Stop hiding behind propriety and ask the woman to the social tomorrow." "The social?" "Yes, the social. The one the whole town's been talking about for weeks. The harvest dance. Music, food, half of Silverton showing up to celebrate another year survived." Blake fixed Ethan with a pointed look. "Take Claire. Court her properly. Show this valley that you're not just the grim rancher carrying the weight of the world. Show her." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons why it was too soon, too complicated, too risky. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying than any excuse. He wanted to take Claire to the social, wanted to dance with her under lantern light, wanted to show the world that she belonged with him. "What if she says no?" "Then you'll survive." "But Ethan—" Blake's expression turned serious. "She won't say no. That woman looks at you like you hung the moon. Don't make her wait forever for you to notice." That afternoon Ethan found Claire in the garden behind the kitchen. She knelt among the vegetables, her hands dark with soil, her face peaceful in concentration. She had planted this garden in the weeks since her arrival. Beans climbing up stakes, tomatoes ripening on the vine, lettuce in neat rows. "Miss Morgan," he said. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "Mr. Caldwell, do you need something?" He should have prepared what to say, should have rehearsed the words. Instead, they came out awkward and rushed. "There's a social tomorrow evening, in town. Music and dancing. I wondered if you might, that is, would you consider, I mean to say." He stopped, started over. "Would you accompany me to the social?" Claire's hands stilled in the dirt. For a long moment she said nothing, and Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. Then she smiled. Not the small, guarded smile he usually saw from her, but something wider and more genuine. "I would like that very much." "You would?" "Yes, Ethan, I would." The use of his first name spoken with such warmth made something in his chest expand. "I'll arrange everything. We'll leave at 4. The social starts at 6, but the ride is long." "I'll be ready." He should have left then, should have returned to work with this victory secure. Instead, he lingered, watching her return to her weeding, cataloging the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair. "Claire, yes. I'm glad you said yes." Her smile when she looked up again could have lit the whole valley. "So am I." The next day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Ethan found himself checking his appearance in every reflective surface, shaved twice, changed his shirt 3 times before settling on the blue one that Mrs. Hawthorne insisted brought out his eyes. "You look like a man heading to his own hanging," the older woman observed with amusement. "Relax, she already said yes." "What if I step on her foot? What if she's uncomfortable? What if people stare?" "Then you'll handle it. Together." Mrs. Hawthorne straightened his collar with practiced efficiency. "That girl has more spine than most men I know. She doesn't need you to protect her from every sideways glance. She just needs you to stand beside her and make it clear she's where she belongs." At 4 o'clock precisely, Ethan waited by the barn with the wagon. He had hitched up their gentlest horses and lined the wagon bed with blankets and pillows. Claire emerged from the house, and Ethan's breath caught. She wore a dress he had never seen before. Deep blue, simple but elegant. Mrs. Hawthorne's work, no doubt. Her hair was pinned up, revealing the graceful line of her neck. She walked with her usual limp, but her chin was high and her eyes bright. "You look beautiful," Ethan said. Color rose in her cheeks. "Mrs. Hawthorne is a miracle worker." "It's not the dress." He helped her into the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist, perhaps longer than strictly necessary. She settled onto the padded seat with a grateful sigh. "This is very comfortable. Couldn't have you rattling around all the way to town." They set off at an easy pace. The afternoon was perfect. Clear sky, warm but not hot, a breeze that carried the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. For the first miles they rode in companionable silence, but gradually conversation began to flow. Claire told him about St. Louis, about the factory where she had worked, the rhythm of machines, the camaraderie among the women despite the harsh conditions. About her cousins who had taken her in after her parents died, and how their charity had slowly curdled into resentment. Ethan told her about his parents, about his mother's laugh and his father's quiet strength, about learning to run the ranch at 23, terrified and determined in equal measure, about the years of drought and debt that had nearly broken them. "Do you regret it?" Claire asked. "Taking on so much so young?" "Sometimes. But what's the alternative? Blake needed raising. The ranch needed running. You do what needs doing." He glanced at her. "You understand that better than most." "Yes, though I'll confess there were days I resented it. Days I wanted to just walk away and let someone else carry the weight." "But you didn't." "Neither did you." They shared a look of understanding. Two people who had learned early that life required endurance. That strength was measured not in grand gestures, but in getting up each morning and doing the next hard thing. By the time they reached Silverton, the sun hung low in the west. The town square had been transformed. Lanterns strung between buildings cast golden light. A platform had been erected for the musicians. Tables laden with food lined one side. People in their best clothes milled about, talking and laughing. Ethan helped Claire down from the wagon, acutely aware of the eyes turning their direction. Let them look. Let them see that Claire Morgan belonged at his side. "Ethan," a woman's voice called out. He turned to see Sarah Mitchell approaching, her husband in tow. Sarah had been in his schoolhouse class years ago. "We heard about the new well. Congratulations." "Thank you. Sarah, Tom, this is Miss Claire Morgan. She's been working at Iron Ridge." "The one who doused for the water." Sarah's eyes lit with interest. "Everyone's talking about it. 37 feet down and a strong flow. That's remarkable." Claire handled the attention with quiet grace. "Mr. Peterson and Tommy Brennan deserve as much credit. They did most of the digging." "But it was your idea," Ethan interjected. "Your courage to try." More people approached, neighbors, townspeople, curiosity and kindness in their eyes. Ethan introduced Claire to each one, making it clear through word and gesture that she was under his protection, that anyone who wanted his business or friendship would treat her with respect. The musicians began to play. A fiddle, a guitar, a man with an accordion. The music was lively and bright. Couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor. "Would you like to dance?" Ethan asked. Claire's expression flickered with something that might have been fear. "I don't dance well, because of my leg." "Then we'll dance badly together." He held out his hand. "Please." She took his hand, let him lead her to the edge of the dancing area. The song was a waltz, slow and rhythmic. Ethan placed his hand at her waist, took her hand in his. "Follow my lead. If I step on your foot, kick me." "I'll try not to." They began to move. Claire's steps were uneven, but Ethan adjusted, taking shorter strides, supporting her weight when she needed it, making the accommodation so subtle that to any observer they simply looked like a couple finding their rhythm. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured. "You're a good liar." "I'm not lying. Look around." She did, and saw that no one was staring, that they had blended into the crowd of dancers, just another couple sharing a moment of simple joy. "See, just us. Just this." They danced 3 more songs. By the last one, Claire's leg was clearly paining her, but she was smiling, really smiling. When the music ended, Ethan led her to a quiet corner where chairs had been set up. "Rest. I'll get us something to drink." He returned with lemonade to find Claire in conversation with an older woman. As he approached, the woman stood. "Mr. Caldwell, I've been hoping to speak with you." Ethan recognized her after a moment. Catherine Webb. Or she had been Catherine Morrison when she broke his heart 5 years ago. She looked happy now, content in a way she never had when they were courting. "Mrs. Webb," he said carefully, "I won't keep you long. I just wanted to say hello, and to tell Miss Morgan how lovely she looks this evening." Catherine's smile was genuine. "I'm glad to see you both here." "Thank you." Claire said, her voice neutral. Catherine hesitated, then spoke directly to Claire. "Might I have a word in private?" Claire glanced at Ethan. He nodded, though every protective instinct screamed at him to intervene. Claire rose and followed Catherine to a spot beneath one of the lanterns just out of earshot. Ethan watched, ready to move if needed. But the conversation, though intense, did not seem hostile. At one point, Catherine placed a hand on Claire's arm, said something that made Claire's eyes widen. Then Catherine smiled, squeezed Claire's hand, and walked away. Claire returned her expression thoughtful. "What did she say?" Ethan asked. "She apologized for the past, for hurting you, for the reason she left." Claire sat down, her eyes searching Ethan's face. She said she wasn't strong enough for the isolation. That ranch life scared her because she was afraid of being alone with only her own thoughts for company. And she said I was clearly made of sterner stuff, that she could see how happy you were, that I should hold on to that happiness because it was rare and precious. Claire's voice dropped. "She blessed us, Ethan, gave her approval even though no one asked for it." Something in Ethan's chest unclenched. He had not realized he was still carrying anger toward Catherine, had not known her approval would matter. But it did, because it closed a door on the past and opened a window to the future. "She's right," he said, "about you being strong, about the happiness." "Ethan?" "No, let me say this." He took Claire's hands in his. "These past weeks with you at Iron Ridge have been the best I can remember. Not because you found water, though that saved us. Not because you're an excellent cook, though you are. But because you made that house feel like a home. Made me remember that there's more to life than duty and work and carrying weight." Claire's eyes glistened. "You did the same for me. Made me feel seen. Made me feel like I could be more than the burden I've always been told I was." The music started again. A slower song, gentler. Ethan stood and offered his hand. "One more dance." "My leg." "I know. Dance with me anyway." They moved back onto the floor. This time Ethan held her closer, taking more of her weight, making it easy for her to follow. She rested her head against his shoulder, and they swayed together, barely moving, but perfectly matched. "People are staring," she whispered. "Let them. Let them see that I'm the luckiest man in Colorado." When the song ended, Ethan did not release her. "Walk with me, just for a bit." She nodded. They strolled through town away from the noise and crowd toward the creek that ran behind the church. An old cottonwood tree stood sentinel there, its branches reaching wide. Lantern light from the social cast enough glow to see by. Ethan had not planned this, had not rehearsed. But the moment felt right, felt like the only moment that mattered. "Claire, I need to tell you something." "Yes." "Since the day I met you, you've been changing things, changing me. At first I told myself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for your hard work. But that's not true." He took her hands again, held them carefully. "I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to be less than you are. I love watching you in the kitchen, the way you make that space yours. I love how you saw what Blake needed when I was too blind to see it. I love you, Claire Morgan, completely." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me." "Why terrifying?" "Because I never thought I could have this. Never thought a man would see past my limp and my scars and want me anyway. I don't see past those things. I see them. I see how hard you work despite the pain. I see how you've turned something that could have broken you into proof of how strong you are." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. His hand shook slightly as he opened it. "This was my mother's ring. Father gave it to her the day he proposed. On his deathbed he made me promise to only give it to a woman of true strength, a woman who could stand beside me, not behind me." The ring was simple, a single small diamond set in worn gold. Not fancy, but beautiful in its honesty. "Claire Morgan." Ethan knelt on the grass beside the creek. "I don't have much to offer. A ranch that's barely staying afloat, a brother who's leaving soon, debt and drought and 100 uncertainties. But I can offer you my heart, my loyalty, my best effort every day for the rest of our lives. I can offer you a partnership, a home, a place where you'll never be a burden because you'll be the foundation. Will you marry me?" The tears came harder now, but she was smiling through them. "Yes, yes, Ethan, I'll marry you. I love you, and yes." He stood and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if his mother had known all along who would wear it next. Then he pulled Claire into his arms and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as Claire's arms came around his neck and she kissed him back with equal passion. They stood beneath the cottonwood tree, holding each other, the future suddenly bright and certain. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Claire looked at the ring on her finger. "It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you." "Sweet talker." "Only for you." They returned to the social hand in hand. News spread fast in a small town. By the time they reached the square, everyone knew. Congratulations poured in, handshakes and hugs and well wishes from people Ethan barely knew. Blake appeared, his grin wide enough to split his face. "About time, brother." "You knew I was going to propose?" "I knew you were an idiot if you didn't." Blake turned to Claire. "Welcome to the family, officially." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration, dancing and food and laughter. For the first time in longer than Ethan could remember, he felt light, felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would work out. On the ride home, Claire leaned against his shoulder, her left hand resting where they could both see the ring catch moonlight. "When?" she asked. "When what?" "When should we marry?" "Soon. As soon as possible." Ethan paused, then amended. "Unless you want a long engagement. Time to plan something fancy." "I don't need fancy. I just need you." 6 weeks then, after harvest. Give us time to make arrangements, but not so long we're tempted to rush things." 6 weeks. Claire smiled. "I can wait 6 weeks. Barely." When they reached Iron Ridge, Ethan walked her to the kitchen door, kissed her once more gently, reverently. "Sleep well, Claire Morgan. Soon to be Claire Caldwell." "I like the sound of that." "So do I. More than you know." He waited until she was safely inside before heading to the barn to put away the wagon. Blake found him there, still grinning. "You did good, Ethan. Really good." "I got lucky." "No, you got smart, finally." Blake sobered slightly. "About California. I'm still going, but I'll stay for the wedding. Want to see this through before I leave." "I'd appreciate that." "And Ethan, I'm happy for you. For both of you. You deserve this. So do you. In California, doing things your way." They stood together in the quiet barn, two brothers who had finally learned to let each other be free. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer frightening. They had survived storms and drought and near death. They would survive whatever came next. Together, each in his own way, they were finally home. The days between the engagement and the wedding fell into a rhythm that felt both frantic and purposeful. Harvest came early and abundant. The cattle fat from good grass and plentiful water fetched strong prices at market. The ranch hands worked dawn to dusk, and even Blake, still favoring his healing leg, slightly pulled his weight without complaint. Ethan found himself in Silverton more often than usual, not just for supplies but for the 100 details a wedding required. He consulted with the minister, ordered lumber for the platform where they would stand, arranged for a photographer traveling through from Denver to detour to the ranch. But underneath the practical preparations ran a current of worry. The debt payment loomed. 28 days now, and Harker's forged promissory note remained unresolved, a sword hanging over everything. "You should file a counterclaim," Blake said one evening as they reviewed the accounts. "Challenge the note before he files against you. With what evidence? We have nothing concrete. We have the truth. Truth costs money to prove in court." Ethan rubbed his tired eyes. "Mr. Webster suggested I look for the original survey documents. Father kept everything. If we could find proof that the boundaries were properly filed, it might show Harker's note is false." "Where would Father have kept something that important?" "I've been through the desk a dozen times, the strong box, every drawer and cubby in his study." Ethan's frustration leaked into his voice. "Nothing." Blake was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Then his head snapped up. "Wait. Do you remember that secret compartment in Father's desk, the one he showed us when we were kids?" Ethan's heart stuttered. "I'd forgotten. The drawer with the false bottom." They practically ran to their father's study. The desk sat against the wall, massive and solid. Ethan pulled out the large bottom drawer and felt along its underside, searching for the catch he had not touched in 20 years. There, a small button hidden in a groove. He pressed it and heard a soft click. The drawer bottom lifted, revealing a narrow space beneath. Inside lay a leather portfolio cracked with age. Ethan lifted it carefully and untied the string that held it closed. Papers spilled out. Deeds, receipts, letters, and there near the bottom the original survey map from 1855. But more importantly, beneath the map lay a letter. Ethan unfolded it with shaking hands. The paper was yellowed, but the ink remained clear. It was addressed to his father from a lawyer in Denver. "January 1870. Ethan read aloud. "Dear Mr. Caldwell, I write to inform you that Frank Harker Sr. has approached me seeking legal counsel in securing a loan from you for the amount of $500. Blake leaned over his shoulder, reading along. "I advised him that you were unlikely to extend such credit given the history between your families." Ethan continued reading. "He was most insistent and suggested he would find other means to acquire capital. I thought it prudent to inform you of his intentions should he attempt to claim otherwise in future. Please consider this letter as testimony to his request and your refusal should any dispute arise. Your humble servant, Josiah Marks, attorney at law." "That's it," Blake breathed. "That's proof Father never loaned Harker anything. The note is a forgery." Ethan's hands trembled as he held the letter. Evidence. Real concrete evidence that could destroy Harker's claim. But more than that, vindication. Proof that his father had been the honest man Ethan always believed him to be. "We take this to the county court," Ethan said. "File a complaint. Force Harker to defend his claim." "When?" "Tomorrow, first thing." That night Ethan could barely sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the letter locked safely in the strongbox beside him. By dawn he was dressed and ready. Blake insisted on coming, and together they rode to Silverton as the sun climbed. The courthouse was a modest building 2 stories of whitewashed wood. Judge Marcus presided over the county with a reputation for fairness tempered by impatience for nonsense. Ethan could only hope that extended to forged documents. The clerk accepted their filing and scheduled a hearing for the following Tuesday. 4 days. 4 days to prepare a case against a man with money and lawyers. "You'll need representation," the clerk advised. "Harker's Denver lawyer is expensive for a reason. Can you recommend someone?" "Samuel Grant. Local man. Not fancy, but honest and sharp." They found Samuel Grant above the general store in a small office that smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. Grant was 50, with gray hair and shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened to their story without interruption, examined the letter, and nodded slowly. "This is good. Very good. The problem is proving the signature on Harker's note is forged. Do you have any samples of your father's handwriting? Dozens, letters, receipts, the ranch ledgers. Bring them all. We'll need to show the judge that the signature on Harker's note doesn't match your father's authentic hand." Grant leaned back in his chair. "I'll be honest with you. This could go either way. Judges don't like accusations of forgery. It impugns a man's character severely. But if we can prove it, Harker won't just lose his claim. He'll face criminal charges." Tuesday arrived with unseasonable cold, a preview of the winter to come. Ethan wore his only suit brushed clean of dust. Blake sat beside him in the gallery, silent support. Claire had wanted to come, but Ethan asked her to stay at the ranch. If this went badly, he did not want her to witness his failure. The courtroom filled slowly. Curious townspeople. A few ranchers who had business with Harker and perhaps hoped to see him taken down. And Harker himself, resplendent in an expensive suit, his Denver lawyer at his side, looking bored and confident. Judge Marcus entered, and everyone stood. He was 60, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much dishonesty to be easily fooled. "Caldwell versus Harker. Claim of fraudulent debt. Mr. Grant, you're representing the plaintiff. I am, Your Honor. Proceed." Grant stood and laid out their case methodically. The letter from Attorney Marks proving Ethan's father had refused the loan. The lack of any record in the ranch accounts of money received. The timing that coincided suspiciously with Harker Sr.'s failing mining venture. Then he produced the writing samples. 15 different documents with Ethan's father's signature. Receipts, letters, the deed to the ranch. Each one consistent in style and formation. Finally, he produced Harker's promissory note and set it beside the authentic signatures. "You'll observe, Your Honor, that the signature on the alleged promissory note differs in 3 key ways." Grant used a pointer to indicate the differences. "The capital C in Caldwell slants left here, but right in all authentic samples. The double L extends below the line here, but not in authentic samples. And the final D has a distinct loop here that appears nowhere in genuine signatures." The courtroom was silent. Even Harker's expensive lawyer had stopped looking bored. Judge Marcus studied the documents through a magnifying glass for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked up at Harker. "Mr. Harker, can you explain these discrepancies?" Harker's lawyer stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client cannot be held responsible for the quality of penmanship executed by the debtor 20 years ago. Men's hands change with age and circumstance." 20 years, Grant interjected. "The note is dated 1870, 5 years ago." "My apologies, 5 years. Nevertheless, the principle stands." Judge Marcus was not impressed. "Mr. Harker, where is your witness, Tom Mitchell, according to this document?" "Deceased, Your Honor, as noted in our initial filing." "How convenient." The judge's tone was dry. "And you have no other evidence of this loan beyond this single document?" "The note itself is evidence, Your Honor." "A note that I am increasingly inclined to believe is fraudulent." Marcus set down the magnifying glass. "Mr. Grant has presented a contemporaneous letter from a licensed attorney stating categorically that the loan was refused. He has presented multiple samples demonstrating that the signature is inconsistent with known genuine examples. You have presented a single document with no supporting evidence and a conveniently deceased witness." Harker's lawyer tried again. Your Honor, if we might have time to gather additional evidence. You've had ample time. This matter has been pending for weeks. Marcus straightened in his seat, his decision clear on his face. I find the evidence presented by the plaintiff to be compelling and credible. I find the defendant's claim to be without merit and likely fraudulent. The debt claimed by Frank Harker is hereby declared void and unenforceable. Relief crashed through Ethan so powerfully he nearly swayed in his seat. But the judge was not finished. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor for investigation into possible criminal fraud. Mr. Harker, you would be wise to engage legal counsel for that proceeding as well. Harker's face had gone pale, then red. His lawyer was already gathering papers, clearly eager to distance himself from a losing case that had suddenly become criminal. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Marcus continued, regarding the boundary questions raised by Mr. Harker's previous inquiries. Do you have your original survey documents? Grant produced them. The judge examined them briefly and nodded. These appear to be in order and properly filed. The boundaries of Iron Ridge Ranch are hereby confirmed as stated in the original patent application. Any future challenges will require significantly more evidence than vague accusations. He banged his gavel. Case dismissed. Court adjourned. The sound of that gavel hitting wood was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever heard. Outside the courthouse, Blake whooped loud enough to startle pigeons from the roof. We won, Ethan, we actually won. The ranch is safe. Ethan could hardly believe it. The boundaries are confirmed. The debt is void. We're safe. Samuel Grant shook both their hands. Congratulations. Though I suspect Harker will think twice before trying something like this again. Having a judge call him a fraud in open court will damage his reputation considerably. What do we owe you? For the pleasure of watching Frank Harker squirm, consider it a wedding gift. Though I expect an invitation to this celebration everyone's talking about. You'll have it. Front row. The ride back to Iron Ridge passed in a haze of relief and joy. Blake kept laughing for no reason, the tension of months finally released. Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders since his father's death had lifted. They reached the ranch as the sun touched the western peaks. Claire stood on the porch, Mrs. Hawthorne beside her. Ethan's face must have told the story because Claire came flying down the steps as fast as her limp would allow. He caught her in his arms and lifted her, spinning her around. We won. The note is void. The boundaries are confirmed. We won. Oh, thank God. Claire was crying and laughing at once. I was so worried. No need to worry anymore. We're safe. The ranch is safe. And in 3 weeks we're getting married. He set her down gently. Unless you want to wait longer. Absolutely not. 3 weeks, not a day more. The hands emerged from the bunkhouse and the barn drawn by the commotion. Peterson Johnson, Riley Matthews Stevens, Garrett, Tommy running from the corral where he had been working. What's happening? Tommy asked breathlessly. We won the court case, Blake announced. The ranch is safe, and my brother is getting married in 3 weeks, which means we have a lot of work to do. The next 3 weeks transformed Iron Ridge. The platform for the ceremony was built under the aspen grove on the north ridge where the trees would be turning gold by late October. Mrs. Hawthorne coordinated the food preparation with military precision. Claire sewed her wedding dress in stolen hours, refusing to let Ethan see even a glimpse. Blake threw himself into preparations with the energy of someone trying to make every moment count. He built a small cabin near the main house, a wedding gift he insisted on completing himself. 1 room for now, but designed to expand as a family grew. You'll want your own space, he said when Ethan protested it was too much. Trust me, newly married couples need privacy. 2 days before the wedding, Blake pulled Ethan aside after supper. We should talk about California. They walked to the creek, the water running low now in the autumn drought. Blake sat on a flat rock and Ethan settled beside him. I'm leaving the Monday after your wedding, Blake said. Already arranged passage on the stage to Sacramento. Ethan had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so plainly still hurt. So soon. If I don't go now, I never will. I'll find reasons to stay. Winter coming, spring planting something. I need to do this while I have the courage. You'll do well there? I know it. I hope so. Blake picked up a stone and tossed it into the water. I've been thinking about something. About Father's dream for this place. What about it? He wanted it to be our legacy, something we'd pass to our children. But Ethan, it's your legacy now, not mine. And that's okay. Blake looked at his brother directly. I used to feel guilty about not wanting what he wanted, but Father also taught us to be true to ourselves, to work hard at whatever we chose. I'm choosing horses. You're choosing the ranch. We're both honoring him, just in different ways. When did you get so wise? When I nearly died and realized life is too short to live someone else's dream. Blake's voice went rough. I'll miss you, miss this place, but I'll visit. I promise. And I'll write. Often. You better, or I'll come drag you back. Deal. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set. Two brothers who had fought and struggled and finally found their way to understanding. The future would take them different directions, but the bond between them remained unbreakable. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, October at its finest. The aspens had turned golden overnight, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate. The leaves shimmered in the breeze, creating a canopy of light that seemed almost supernatural. Ethan stood on the platform with Peterson, who had agreed to officiate. The ranch hands sat in rows of chairs borrowed from the church. Tommy, scrubbed clean and wearing his Sunday best, served as groomsman. Blake stood beside Ethan as best man, grinning with unrestrained joy. You ready? Blake asked. Terrified. Good. That means it matters. The small gathering of guests hushed as music began. A fiddle played by one of the hands, simple but beautiful. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared first, walking slowly up the aisle with the dignity of someone who had earned her place in this family through decades of service. Then Claire. She wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Hawthorne had helped her sew. Simple lines that fell gracefully over her frame. Her dark hair was pinned up with wildflowers woven through. She carried a small bouquet of autumn blooms. She walked alone. No father to give her away, but she did not need one. She walked with her head high and her eyes on Ethan, her limp, visible, but irrelevant. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When she reached the platform, Ethan stepped down to offer his hand. She took it, and together they climbed up to face Peterson. Dearly beloved, Peterson began, his voice gruff with emotion. We gather here in the sight of God in this community to witness the joining of Ethan Caldwell and Claire Morgan in holy matrimony. The words washed over Ethan in a blur. He was intensely aware of Claire's hand in his, of her eyes green and bright with unshed tears, of the way the sunlight caught in her hair and turned it gold at the edges. Ethan, do you take Claire to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse in sickness and health, as long as you both shall live? I do. The words came out strong and sure. And Claire, do you take Ethan to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse in sickness and health, as long as you both shall live? I do. Her voice was steady despite the tears now falling freely. The rings. Blake produced two simple gold bands. Ethan took one and slid it onto Claire's finger beneath his mother's engagement ring. With this ring I thee wed, he said. I promise to see you truly every day, to support you, not carry you, to stand beside you in all things, to love you until my last breath. Claire took the other ring and placed it on Ethan's finger. With this ring I thee wed. I promise to walk beside you however uneven my steps, to share your burdens and your joys, to make our house a home, to love you always. Peterson's eyes were suspiciously bright. By the power vested in me by the county of San Juan, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. Ethan cupped Claire's face in his hands and kissed her gently. The gathered crowd erupted in applause. Somewhere Tommy was cheering. Blake was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt, but Ethan heard none of it. In that moment there was only Claire, his wife, his partner, the answer to questions he had not known how to ask. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Peterson presented them to the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Caldwell." The celebration that followed was joyous and generous. Tables laden with food appeared as if by magic. Mrs. Hawthorne had outdone herself. Roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden pies, and cakes of every variety. The hands had constructed a dance floor of smooth boards. As the sun set, lanterns were lit, and music began. Ethan claimed the first dance with his wife and then danced with Mrs. Hawthorne, while Blake swept Claire around the floor with surprising grace. Toasts were offered. Peterson spoke of watching Ethan grow from a frightened young man into a rancher worthy of his father's legacy. Samuel Grant, true to his word, had attended and spoke eloquently about justice prevailing. Tommy gave a rambling speech about fences and water and how Miss Morgan, now Mrs. Caldwell, was the bravest person he knew. And then Blake stood glass in hand, his expression a mixture of joy and melancholy. "I'm not good with words," he began. "Not like Ethan. But I need to say something." He looked at his brother. "You saved my life, literally when you pulled me from that ravine, but also figuratively by letting me go, by giving me permission to find my own path. That took more courage than climbing down in a storm." His voice thickened with emotion. "And Claire, you're exactly what this family needed. Someone who sees strength instead of obligation. Someone who understands that love means freedom, not control. Thank you for loving my stubborn brother." He raised his glass. "To Ethan and Claire, may your life together be filled with as much joy as you've brought to all of us." "To Ethan and Claire," the crowd echoed. As darkness fell fully, couples began to drift away. The hands to the bunkhouse, neighbors to their wagons for the long ride home. Mrs. Hawthorne, after extracting promises that they would eat the leftover food, retired to her room. Finally, only Blake remained. He hugged Claire fiercely, whispered something in her ear that made her laugh through tears. Then he turned to Ethan. "I'll be gone before you wake tomorrow," Blake said. "Stage leaves at dawn, and I want to be on it." "Blake." Everything Ethan wanted to say caught in his throat. I know, brother. Me too." Blake pulled him into a hard embrace. "Take care of her. Take care of the ranch. Take care of yourself." "Right as soon as you're settled." "I will. I promise." Blake stepped back, his eyes bright. "Be happy, Ethan. You've earned it." He turned and walked toward the bunkhouse, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Ethan watched until he could no longer see his brother, feeling the bittersweet ache of letting go. Claire's hand slipped into his. "He'll be all right." "I know. Doesn't make it easier. Nothing worth doing is easy." Ethan turned to look at his wife, beautiful in the lantern light. "Ready to see your wedding present. The cabin Blake built. He wanted you to have a home of your own. Well, our own." They walked hand in hand to the small structure. Blake had left the door unlocked and lanterns lit inside. The cabin was simple but carefully made. A main room with a stone fireplace. A bedroom with a large bed covered in a quilt Mrs. Hawthorne must have made, a small kitchen area, and shelves empty now but waiting to be filled with books and memories and life. "It's perfect," Claire breathed. "It's a start. We can add on as needed, as our family grows." Claire turned to face him, her expression soft and open. "I like the sound of that. Our family." Ethan pulled her close, holding her as if she might vanish if he let go. "I love you, Mrs. Caldwell. I love you too." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Ethan swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their new home. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night and the world. Inside, husband and wife discovered each other with tenderness and passion, building something new and precious in the space Blake had created for them. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the aspens rustled in the breeze. The ranch slept peacefully, its future finally secure. And somewhere on the road to Sacramento, Blake Caldwell rode toward his own future, carrying his brother's blessing and the knowledge that sometimes love meant letting go. The winter that followed the wedding was mild by Colorado standards. Snow fell soft and infrequent. The cattle weathered it well. And in the small cabin on Iron Ridge, Ethan and Claire built their life together. Claire woke each morning before dawn, same as always, but now she woke beside her husband. They shared coffee in the quiet before the day began, talked about small things and large ones, planned for spring planting, and dreamed about children who would run through these rooms someday. Blake's letters arrived regularly, full of enthusiasm and homesickness in equal measure. He had found work on a horse ranch outside Sacramento. The owner, an aging Californio with more land than sons, had taken Blake under his wing. By February, Blake wrote that he was purchasing his first breeding pair. By March, he had won a local race and earned enough to buy 2 more horses. "He sounds happy," Claire said, reading the latest letter aloud to Ethan over breakfast. "He does, though he misses home. Listen to this part." She found the passage. "Tell Ethan the California grass is fine, but it's not Colorado grass. Tell him I miss Peterson's awful coffee and Tommy's endless questions. Tell him I dream about aspens sometimes and wake up thinking I'm home." Ethan felt the familiar ache of his brother's absence, but also pride. Blake was building something of his own, making a name for himself. That mattered more than proximity. "He asks if we've set a date," Claire continued, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "A date for what?" "For the baby. He says, and I quote, 'I want to know when I need to come back to meet my niece or nephew.'" "Claire." Ethan set down his coffee cup carefully. "Are you—" She nodded, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. "I suspected last month. Mrs. Hawthorne confirmed it this week. Due in late October, she thinks." Joy and terror flooded through Ethan in equal measure. A child. Their child. The continuation of everything his father had built and dreamed of. But something in Claire's expression gave him pause. "You're frightened. What if the baby has my leg?" The words tumbled out, laced with a fear she had clearly been holding back. "What if I pass on this weakness? What if our child suffers because of me?" Ethan moved around the table and knelt beside her chair, took her hands in his. "Then we'll teach them what you taught me. That strength isn't measured by an even gait. That courage means getting up every day despite the pain. That they are loved exactly as they are." "But the pain, Ethan. I wouldn't wish this pain on my worst enemy, let alone my child." "I know. But listen to me." He waited until she met his eyes. "If our child has your leg, they'll also have your strength, your determination, your refusal to let anything break them. Those are gifts, Claire, precious gifts that will serve them all their lives." "You really believe that?" "I know it. I've watched you transform this ranch with nothing but stubbornness and courage. I've seen you walk through pain that would have broken lesser people and never once complain. If our child is half as strong as you, they'll be extraordinary." The fear in Claire's eyes eased slightly. "You always know what to say." "That's because I'm telling you the truth." He placed his hand over hers on her stomach. "Boy or girl, healthy or not, this child will be loved, will be wanted, will be ours." Spring came early and lush. The winter snows had soaked deep into the soil, and now that moisture fueled an explosion of growth. Grass grew thick and green. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. The cattle grew fat and produced healthy calves. Tommy, now 13 and shooting up toward manhood, had become Peterson's unofficial apprentice. He could rope and ride and fix fence as well as any hand twice his age. More importantly, he had developed the kind of weather sense and land knowledge that took most men decades to acquire. "That boy's going to run a ranch someday," Peterson observed one afternoon. "Mark my words." "He could run this one if he wanted," Ethan said. "When he's older, if he chooses." "You thinking of retiring? Thinking of the future? Of what comes after me?" Ethan watched Tommy working with a young horse, patient and firm. "Father built this place. I've maintained it. But someone will need to carry it forward. Tommy could do that. Or our children. or both. Long-term thinking, your father would approve. As Claire's pregnancy progressed, the ranch rallied around her. Mrs. Hawthorne fussed over her diet and rest. The hands fell over themselves to help with any task that required reaching or lifting. Even the milk cow seemed to sense something growing docile and easy to manage. But it was Tommy who surprised everyone. He appeared one evening at the cabin door, hat in hands, looking nervous. "Mrs. Caldwell, could I ask you something?" "Of course, Tommy. Come in." He entered, but would not sit, just stood fidgeting with his hat brim. "I was wondering that as I wanted to know when the baby comes, could I help with teaching them things, I mean, like Mr. Caldwell teaches me." Claire's eyes went soft. "You want to be like an older brother?" "If that's all right. I know I'm not family, but I thought maybe if you didn't mind." "Tommy Brennan, we would be honored." Claire stood and hugged him, something that made the boy blush furiously. "This baby will be lucky to have you looking out for them." After Tommy left practically floating with happiness, Ethan pulled Claire into his arms. "You're going to be an amazing mother." "I hope so. I'm terrified." "That means you'll be good at it. Only fools are confident about parenting." Summer blazed hot and dry, but the spring moisture sustained them. The garden produced abundantly. Mrs. Hawthorne spent days canning and preserving building stores for the winter. Claire helped when she could, though her growing belly made standing for long periods difficult. In August, another letter arrived from Blake. He had purchased land of his own, 40 acres in the Sacramento Valley, small by Iron Ridge standards, but his own. He was building a house and expanding his herd, and the letter concluded with obvious excitement. He had met a woman, Maria, the daughter of his mentor. They were courting properly. "He sounds completely smitten." Claire laughed as she read the part where Blake described Maria's eyes as dark as midnight and just as full of stars. That's Blake. When he falls completely. Like his brother. Exactly like his brother. September brought the first hints of autumn. The aspens began their transformation from green to gold. The air held a crispness that spoke of coming winter, and Claire's belly grew round and heavy, the baby moving constantly beneath her skin. "Active child," Dr. Morrison observed during his monthly visit. "Strong heartbeat. Everything looks good." "When?" Claire asked. "Late October. Could be Halloween itself if the baby has a sense of timing." Claire and Ethan prepared the cabin's bedroom for the new arrival. A cradle that Blake had built before leaving sat ready beside their bed. Mrs. Hawthorne had sewn tiny clothes. Everything waited, held in breathless anticipation. October arrived with the first hard frost. The aspens reached their peak glory, the entire North Ridge glowing golden in the afternoon sun. 1 year ago, Ethan and Claire had married beneath these trees. Now they prepared to welcome their first child. On October 28th, Claire's labor began. It started gently, small contractions that came and went. Claire tried to continue her normal routine, but by afternoon the contractions had intensified. Mrs. Hawthorne took charge immediately, sending Peterson to fetch Dr. Morrison. Ethan paced the main house where Mrs. Hawthorne had insisted Claire labor. The bedroom was prepared, water boiled, everything ready. But ready was not the same as unafraid. "First babies take time," Mrs. Hawthorne said, catching Ethan in mid-pace. "Could be hours yet. Go do something useful instead of wearing a hole in my floor." But Ethan could not leave, could not focus on anything but the sounds from the bedroom. Claire's breathing controlled and steady. Mrs. Hawthorne's calm instructions, the clock ticking with agonizing slowness. Dr. Morrison arrived as the sun was setting. He examined Claire and emerged looking serious. "The baby is positioned well, but her hip structure is making this difficult. She's going to have to work harder than most women. It'll be a long night." "Is she in danger?" "Not immediately, but long labors carry risks. I'll stay and monitor closely." The night stretched endless and dark. Through the walls, Ethan heard Claire working, breathing through contractions, sometimes crying out when the pain grew too great, once screaming his name. He tried to go to her, but Mrs. Hawthorne blocked the door. She needs to focus. You'll only distract her. Trust her, Ethan. Trust her strength." So Ethan paced and prayed and remembered every conversation they had ever had, her fear that the baby would inherit her disability, his promise that love would be enough. Please, he prayed to whoever might be listening, please let them both be all right. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. 2. The house was silent except for the sounds from the bedroom. 3 o'clock. Then, at 11:47 p.m., a new sound. High and angry and absolutely perfect. A baby's cry. Ethan's legs nearly gave out with relief. He sank into a chair, his hands shaking, tears streaming down his face without shame or restraint. The bedroom door opened. Mrs. Hawthorne emerged, her face lined with exhaustion but wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, healthy and strong, 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs like a trumpet. And Claire, exhausted but fine. Come meet your boy." Ethan entered on unsteady legs. Claire lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a white blanket, lay the tiniest person Ethan had ever seen. "His legs." Ethan's voice came out barely a whisper. "Perfect." Claire's smile was incandescent. "Look, Ethan. Look at him." Ethan knelt beside the bed, looked at his son for the first time. The baby's eyes were closed, his face scrunched and red. His tiny hands waved in the air, fingers spreading and closing. And his legs, visible where the blanket had fallen open, were straight and strong. "He's perfect," Ethan breathed. "He is." Claire touched the baby's cheek with infinite gentleness. "Samuel Ethan Caldwell, named for your father and you." "Samuel." Ethan tested the name. "Can I hold him?" Claire passed the baby over carefully. The weight was nothing, barely more than a thought, but the responsibility was everything. This tiny person depended on them completely, would learn from them, would carry their name and their legacy forward. "Hello, Samuel," Ethan whispered. "Welcome to Iron Ridge. Welcome home." The baby yawned, revealing pink gums, seemed to look at his father for a moment, then settled into sleep with the absolute confidence of someone who knew he was safe. In that moment, Ethan understood what his father had tried to tell him all those years ago. Legacy was not just land or buildings or money in the bank. Legacy was this perfect child, this exhausted wife, this continuation of something that mattered. "Thank you," he said to Claire. "For what?" "For Samuel, for being brave enough to bring him into the world, for trusting me, for everything. We made him together." Claire's eyes were already drifting, closed, exhaustion claiming her. "We'll raise him together, teach him together, love him together." Yes, always together. Ethan sat in the chair beside the bed, his son in his arms, his wife sleeping peacefully. Outside, dawn was breaking. The start of a new day, the start of a new life. The first year passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming joy. Samuel grew rapidly, thriving on his mother's milk and the abundant love that surrounded him. He was an easy baby, quick to smile, slow to cry. His legs remained perfectly formed, kicking strongly when he lay on his back. Blake returned for a month that spring, bringing Maria to meet the family. She was everything Blake had described, beautiful and strong and patient with Blake's enthusiasm. She spoke both Spanish and English, switching between them with fluid grace. Mrs. Hawthorne took to her immediately. "When are you two getting married?" she demanded. Blake and Maria exchanged glances. Actually, Blake said, "We were hoping to marry here, at Iron Ridge, under the aspens like you and Claire." "Of course," Ethan said. "Nothing would make us happier." The wedding took place in June, with Samuel, now 8 months old, serving as a somewhat distracted ring-bearer. The ceremony was smaller than Ethan's had been, but no less joyful. Afterward, Blake and Maria returned to California to build their horse ranch together. Time moved steadily forward. Samuel took his first steps at 11 months, tottering between Ethan and Claire with determination. His first word was, "Pa," which made Ethan's chest swell with pride, until Samuel's second word turned out to be horse, which made everyone laugh. When Samuel was 15 months old, Claire discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was less fear. Samuel's perfect health had proven that her disability was not necessarily hereditary. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. In July of 1878, she delivered a daughter. Rosemarie Caldwell came into the world with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Her legs, like her brother's, were perfect. But even if they had not been, even if she had inherited Claire's limp, it would not have mattered. She was loved absolutely from her first breath. The years continued their march. Blake and Maria's letters told of their growing success. Tommy, now 17 and fully a man, had become Peterson's right hand. The old foreman was slowing down, his joints stiff with arthritis, and Tommy took on more responsibility with quiet competence. "I'd like to make him a partner," Ethan said one evening in the spring of 1880. "Give him a stake in the ranch." "That's generous," Claire said. She was nursing their third child, a boy they had named James, born just 3 months before. "Does he know?" "Not yet. Wanted to discuss it with you first. It would mean less for Samuel and Rose and James, smaller inheritance, but a better ranch, a more secure future." Claire shifted the baby to her other breast. "Tommy's earned it. He's family in everything but name. Make him a partner." So Ethan did. Tommy, when told, had been speechless for a full minute before his eyes welled with tears. "You mean it? A real partner? 20% stake. You'll help make decisions, share in profits, help guide the ranch's future." "I don't know what to say, Mr. Caldwell." "Say yes, and stop calling me Mr. Caldwell. Partners use first names." "Yes, yes, Ethan, thank you. I'll work harder than ever, I promise." "I know you will. That's why I asked." 6 years after their wedding, on an October morning identical to the one when they had married, Ethan stood on the porch of the main house watching the sun rise. So much had changed. The cabin he and Claire had lived in those first years had expanded into a proper home, 2 stories now, with room for their growing family. The ranch had expanded too. They now ran 800 head of cattle across additional land Ethan had purchased. The schoolhouse Claire had dreamed of stood complete, teaching not just their children, but those of neighboring families. Claire taught there 3 days a week, her limp no impediment to her effectiveness as an instructor. Peterson had officially retired, though he still came around to offer advice and complain about how things were not done the way he had done them. Tommy had married Sarah Miller from town last year. They lived in the foreman's house with their infant daughter. Blake visited twice a year now, bringing Maria and eventually their own children. His horse operation had grown into one of the most respected in California. He and Ethan wrote regularly, their relationship healed and strong despite the distance. The sound of small feet announced Samuel's arrival. At 5 years old, he was all energy and questions. "Papa, why do we work so hard?" Ethan lifted his son onto his lap. "That's a big question for so early in the morning. Uncle Blake asked me yesterday. He said I should ask you." Ethan chuckled. Blake, even at a distance, still found ways to challenge him. "Well, let's see. We work hard because this land is a promise." "What kind of promise?" "Your great-grandfather, my father, came here with nothing, just a dream that he could build something lasting, something that would give his children and his children's children a better life. He worked hard to make that dream real. Now it's my job to keep the promise, to make it even better, and someday it'll be your job." Samuel's brow furrowed in thought. "But only if I want to." "Only if you want to. The promise is that you'll have the choice. That's what matters most." "I think I want to. The ranch is fun." "It is, but it's also hard work. There'll be days you're tired and sore and wondering why you do this." "What do you do on those days?" "I remember why it matters. I look at the land your great-grandfather cleared, the house he built, the creek that waters our cattle. I look at you and Rose and James, and I remember that this isn't just dirt and grass. It's home. It's family. It's something bigger than just me." The door opened behind them. Claire emerged, Rose on her hip and baby James in her arms. Blake and Maria followed their 3 children, tumbling out in a rush of noise. Talking philosophy before breakfast, Blake asked. That's deep even for you, brother. Samuel had questions. Samuel always has questions, gets that from his mother. They gathered around the long table for breakfast. 3 generations family by blood and choice. The meal was loud and joyful, children laughing, adults trading stories and making plans. After breakfast, Ethan found himself alone on the porch again with Blake. The morning had warmed into a perfect autumn day. You did it, Blake said. What Father wanted. You saved the ranch, built it into something even bigger than he dreamed. We did it. You and me and Claire and Tommy, everyone. But you were the foundation, the one who never gave up even when it seemed impossible. Blake gazed out at the valley. Remember when I chased that stallion, nearly got myself killed? Hard to forget. That was me running from all this, from the responsibility and the weight and the expectations. Blake turned to face his brother. But you know what? I stopped running, built something of my own. And now when I come back here, I see it differently. See it as something precious instead of something suffocating. You gave me that. By letting me go, you let me choose to come back. You're happy in California. I am. And you're happy here. We both found where we belong. Blake clapped Ethan's shoulder. Father would be proud of both of us. I hope so. I know so. That evening, as the sun set over Iron Ridge, painting the aspens gold and the sky orange and pink, the entire family gathered on the ridge where Ethan and Claire had married. It had become tradition, this autumn gathering, a way to mark the changing seasons and remember how far they had come. The adults sat in chairs while the children ran and played. Samuel chased his cousins through the trees. Rose picked wildflowers with solemn concentration. Baby James slept in his mother's arms. 5 years, Claire said softly. Has it really only been 5 years since we married? Feels like a lifetime, Ethan agreed. The good kind of lifetime. The busy kind, certainly. 3 children, a school, expanding the ranch. Some days I'm not sure how we managed it all. Together. That's how we managed. You and me, and everyone who chose to be part of this family. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad I came here. Glad I stayed. Glad I said yes that night under the cottonwood tree. Best decision you ever made. Second best. Best was asking Peterson to teach me dowsing. Ethan laughed. Fair point. That did save the ranch. They sat in comfortable silence watching their children play. Watched as Tommy and Sarah joined them, their daughter toddling between them. Watched as Blake and Maria called their children over for hugs. What do you suppose Father would say? Ethan asked. If he could see all this, I think he'd say you did well, that you kept the promise, that the land is thriving and the family is growing and the legacy is secure. I hope he'd be proud. I know he would. Claire shifted baby James to her other arm. But Ethan, you don't do this for his pride. You do it because it's right, because you love this land and this family. That's what makes it matter. Samuel appeared breathless from running. Papa, come see. We found a bird's nest. Ethan stood. Show me. He followed his son into the aspen grove. Claire walking beside them, their family scattered across the ridge in the golden evening light. This was what mattered, not the acres or the cattle or the money in the bank. These people, this love. The sun touched the horizon, painting the world in shades of fire and gold. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The creek murmured its eternal song. The wind whispered through the aspens. And Ethan Caldwell, standing on the land his father had claimed, surrounded by the family he and Claire had built, understood finally and completely what legacy truly meant. It was not about holding tight, not about forcing the future into the shape you imagined. Legacy was planting seeds and trusting they would grow, was teaching your children to be strong, was letting people find their own paths while making sure they always had a home to return to. Ethan, Claire's voice pulled him from his thoughts. What are you thinking about? He smiled down at his wife, his partner, the woman who had walked into his life and changed everything. Just that Father was right. Land is a promise, but it's not the only promise that matters. What other promises are there? The promise to love, the promise to endure, the promise to build something that will outlast us. He pulled her close, careful of the baby sleeping between them. The promise I made to you 5 years ago, that's the legacy that matters most. Claire's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. I love you, Ethan Caldwell. I love you too. Always. They stood together as the sun finally set, painting the sky in deep purple and indigo. The stars began to emerge one by one, filling the vast Colorado sky with light. Their children's laughter echoed through the grove. Their family surrounded them. Iron Ridge Ranch stretched out below, a testament to hard work and hope and love that endured. 640 acres that had almost been lost. That had been saved by courage and stubbornness and a woman who believed in water witching. The future remained uncertain, as all futures must. There would be droughts and storms, hard winters and difficult choices, joys and sorrows in measures no one could predict. But they would face it together, Ethan and Claire and their children, Blake and Maria and their growing family, Tommy and Sarah and all those who chose to make Iron Ridge their home. The promise would continue, the legacy would grow, and the land, that precious land, would sustain them as it had sustained generations before. This was how stories ended, not with certainty, but with hope, not with all questions answered, but with the courage to keep asking them, not with perfection, but with love deep enough to weather imperfection. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, stories ended with a man and a woman standing beneath aspen trees, watching their children play in the fading light, knowing that despite all the hardship and fear and doubt, they had built something that mattered, something that would last, something worth fighting for. Home.